Hello, welcome. I am Tercy Summaries, and in today's video, I bring you a true gem, so please get comfortable because a masterpiece is about to begin. Our story starts with this handsome blonde guy informing our protagonist that he might die tomorrow because of a dream he had, but John didn't understand what he was talking about. He had already defeated thousands of calamities before, many more than the two chosen ones combined. How could he imagine that he would die later? In the Demon Tower? This was the place where the worst calamity that annihilated all humanity lived. It all began on the last day of the 20th century. The calamities appeared out of nowhere. One day, and cornered humans with overwhelming power. Just when humans were plunged into chaos and horror, 12 gods appeared who called themselves divine gods. They promised humans they would give them the power to overcome the calamities and selected 12 awakened ones to save and control the world, but something unexpected happened. A 13th awakened appeared with the difference that this person had not received any blessing from any god and, to the anger of the 12 awakened, was overwhelmingly stronger than them. They were in the castle, and John defeated all the calamities that appeared. They were amazed. And Hugo thanks him, since because of him, they were able to conquer the Demon Tower. John just wanted to be thanked with fried chicken. The other saints talk about how, if they eliminate the Crimson Eye, they will probably receive incredible rewards, since this is the worst calamity of all. At least they will receive 100 billion Giona. They express that everyone should be satisfied with a good life, and give the money to other countries, since they are on the brink of bankruptcy because of the Crimson Eye. The office worker blackmails them. He needs to get a lot of money to be able to make deals with them. Only they can fix the face he used to have and heal that badly wounded body. They also warn him not to rush to kill the calamities, just because someone is asking for help, since they need to. A certain number of victims caused by accident. To get more reward money, John thinks they're called saints, but in reality, they were just thugs who only cared about themselves. He's going to cut all ties with them once he defeats the Crimson Eye. Then, in the Demon Tower Chief's room, the Crimson Eye, 10 chosen ones were so scared they just wanted to run away from that place. The pressure that Demon exerted was beyond anything they had felt before. Because of the power this calamity had, everyone ran away, fleeing from that death-bound scene. Everyone except our protagonist, who charges forward without a hint of fear. But it had all been planned so John would fall into the trap, stabbed with a dagger in his chest, and falling into the void of the Demon Tower. In that place where he was, he wondered how much time had passed, what the outside world was like at that moment. He must keep cutting, no matter what, since that place was a special trap that summoned infinite calamities, but that wouldn't be enough to kill him. Let them just wait. He's definitely going to survive that. He will tear the damn heads off those bastards. As time passed, exactly 20 years later, he reached the last demon he had left, who was terrified because it was impossible for him to get there, begging for forgiveness. But John, by the way, look at that Viking god, doesn't hesitate to kill him, reaching the end of his path, and the tower begins to collapse. He finally thinks he can get out and faints. Then the scene changes. Outside, everything was destroyed and two people were running for their lives. High-ranking calamities were chasing them. They had taken the wrong path and, by bad luck, ran into them. The wolves managed to catch up. The two were already resigned to their deaths when in the distance they hear an explosion. They didn't understand what was happening. It's our protagonist who is cursing everyone for daring to stab him in the back and push him into a trap. They were damn bastards. He was going to kill them all and, in his rage, defeated wolf after wolf. They think those wolves were orange calamities, which even high-level awakened ones would have trouble with. But he crushed them like insects, and they're surprised because that guy came from that tower. But the other one doesn't believe that's possible. No one could come out alive from that tower. John jumped at them, almost crying. They begged him not to hurt them, and the wolf leader appeared behind them. Both thought they were dead. They couldn't survive an attack from the leader. But John stepped in front of their attack, protecting them, insulting the wolf by calling it just a pup. Defeating it with a single strike, he asked the guys if they could go buy him some food. and some clothes too. Later, at a restaurant, John had eaten $10,000 worth of food. Friends, $10,000 in food. And he knew the contents since they told him they had no money. They asked if he was a disciple, what he was doing in the tower. John replied that he just got out of that tower and gave no further explanation. And he's not a member of any god. Why would he serve such despicable beings? Seeing his reflection in the spoon, he was surprised. He demanded a mirror immediately, and indeed his wounds had healed and his left arm was regenerated. He was drawn to the mark on his palm, and a sharp pain appeared. Messages began to manifest. You have experienced death. Now you can use the power of Ophiuchus. He entered a state of ecstasy. In front of his eyes was a giant snake, with eyes radiating power and confidence. John woke up, asking if they also saw a giant snake, but no one had seen it. Looking at his palm, he saw the abilities he had and realized that his physical change was thanks to the new super regeneration skill. He had heard of something similar with the other saints, but he couldn't sense the presence of any god. But well, regardless of that, what he had to do now was kill the saints who fled and massacre the one who stabbed him in the back. At the scene of the Demon Tower's destruction, journalists and officials are trying to figure out who could have done it. Even the saints would have trouble. With those beasts, they began to speculate that possibly Li John could have returned. At a conference was the Ram Saint Yang Wei. All the reporters were asking what he thought about the possible news that John had survived after 20 years, but the only thing he expressed was that he had no comments on the matter. Later, in his car, he was very angry since he had only heard John's name all day, over and over again. What they said was impossible. He couldn't have survived 20 years in that tower, since there were tens of thousands of evil beings. And, to make matters worse, all were of black rank. His body was already shattered from the backlash of his powers. Not even had he received a blessing to help him. But if hypothetically she had survived, it would be the end for them. In another scene, Mr. Hugo Otters gets off the plane, creating great admiration among those present for being the divine Sagittarius, a true chosen one, on his way to a super important conference. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. He thought it was those damn journalists, creating more conspiracy theories about John, who they always said was alive, but 20 years had already passed. He didn't understand how that could be. Remembering what had happened, he had been out of the tower at John's request, defeating the calamities. He returned so that his prophecy would be wrong and John would come back safely, but only the divine beings survived. They abandoned John and returned with the red eye's head. His achievements were recognized, proclaiming the 12 divine beings, including him as a hero, allowing him to gain money and authority. He couldn't believe John had died and requested the search multiple times, but Molin, the divine being of Cancer, convinced everyone it was impossible, since the number of calamities in that tower was too great. No one could enter, but if Hugo wanted to go, he could go alone, although none of the 12 constellations would help him. He concluded that no matter how strong he was, leaving that tower was impossible. And a call from the Prime Minister came through, who tells him that he did find out the Demon Tower had fallen. But Hugo is not willing to believe any conspiracy. Since John was dead, there was no other explanation but the Prime Minister just received information from Korea that the Legion's exclusive direct line was occupied a few moments ago, and Hugo excitedly asked to stop the car since the calls he received recently were from John. He calls back, and what he hears is a "Mosh mosh, Donald, I will find you and kill you." He shouts to turn around at the airport, saying negotiations with England don't matter. He wants to go back. As for John, he was being informed about what was happening on Earth at that moment. He sees news that his name is trending and the comments are somewhat contradictory. Many call him useless, that the 12 constellations saved him. He did nothing. It angers him, but he calms down and remembers having donated all his properties and possessions to the orphanage if he died. He wonders if that was well kept, but sees that all his belongings were distributed among the 12 constellations. And he gets upset again, breaking his phone and proclaiming, "And now I will kill them all." The guy cries over his phone, since he still hadn't paid for it. John plans to announce his return, but it wouldn't be convenient, since his physical appearance had changed over the last 20 years, and he expresses that he is John. Everyone will call him crazy, so first he will take care of avenging each of the constellations, and he receives a message. Someone is watching you. So he decides to get some fresh air and realizes what was watching him was a household god. Household gods are divine entities controlled by the blessed gods. Those household gods were subordinates of Ares. Leon gets angry. Those things were demanding tribute, and this stupid couple appears. Who are talking about the trending topic, people were very stupid, since they were paying attention to a loser missing for 20 years. The guys warned John to run away, since they were from the Gemini group. They were dangerous. The guy told him to fuck off, blowing cigarette, smoke in his face, and asking why he was angry. The woman thought it was better if they left since she was scared shitless. That guy agreed. Because losers like them obviously preferred guys like John. They took refuge in a person who was clearly weaker than all the saints. How do they say that to John? John shouted at them, "Cockroaches." They turned back and confronted him to repeat what he said about how such a weak person could beat John. Before he finished the sentence, he gave him a small punch, which sent him flying and left him unconscious. The woman, seeing what happened, tried to scratch him, but the protagonist already saw it coming and gave her another hit with his finger. "I know this hit as Tinkank. I don't know about you." The guys complained that he couldn't use his skills in the middle of the street, especially not against Rangui's disciples. But he had only defended himself, and if he hadn't done anything, he could have died. He knew something was strange when he hit them. This artifact seemed divine, but it wasn't possible since only the saints could have them. And here's the explanation. John didn't know it, but when humanity was almost wiped out by calamities, the divine gods chose 12 chosen saints. But since the world couldn't be protected by only 12 people, the saints gathered people to follow them and formed a divine squad. And the people who awakened by receiving the power of the saints are called disciples, who are classified into ranks. For example, there is the triple S rank, which are the chosen saints, who are the leaders of their divine squad. The double S ranks are the 10 stars who can be considered candidates for saints. The S rank, which is the strongest disciple, who commands the disciples in battles. The A ranks, who are the strongest disciples of their squads. The B and C ranks, who are the other disciples and the power of the divine gods. It comes from the faith of the disciples. I don't know if the word disciples bothers them, but it gives me a strange feeling. That's why the saints organize all kinds of contests to find people who want to join. The selected disciples receive gifts from the divine gods. It has been like that for 20 years. John turns around. The household gods have been watching what happened, urging him to finish off the man and the woman. They wanted to see bloodshed and promised a useful gift if he killed both of them. These beings were like the shadow of the divine gods. Opposing them was the same as opposing the gods. They asked him to hurry up and do what they want, but John didn't agree with that. He wondered why Gene Wei's thugs were in a place like that, but it was obvious. They were trying to fill their stomachs. He thinks that Gene Wei was still the same bastard as always. He stomps his foot, producing a loud noise that scares away the sheep-like clouds looking at the unconscious. He thinks that if he were an important person, everything he wore would be branded, so he steals it all. After a few hours, they're outside his buddy's apartment, who thanks him for saving his life and taking him home today. But John asks if he's not going to come in because he's already sleepy. He also takes advantage to get a haircut. He's a handsome friend from the past. Every strand of hair was precious to him, since he kept losing hair as a side effect of his abilities. He notices there's a small calamity in the house. That was very strange, because it usually meant something was attracting them, and that was because he had all those evil artifacts. It was an object he received directly from Gemini. They were his most precious relics, and the protagonist cuts it. He complains that this mask was a divine artifact that controlled whoever wore it. The music box was used to steal personal information, the watch to bring calamities. He fills with rage, thinking that the saints not only stole his money, but they also sell and give away evil artifacts to fuel their magic and wealth. Suddenly, this character appears. And who is the owner of that house? The guy tells him the whole story of how they had met. But he doesn't believe him at all. To make matters worse, he broke all the divine artifacts in the house. He asked which divine painting it was or which divine god he followed. Upon learning that he didn't follow any, he asks for his name. Hearing the name Legion, he flies into a rage. He states that he broke into his own house and smashed all the divine artifacts, pretending to be Legion. Activating all his power, a warning message appears on the portal. That if he continues like this, he's going to burn the whole house down. He checks the redhead's stats, which were quite strong. He could even use a high-rank summoning at such a young age. He tells Jimin to leave if he doesn't want to die. The first time they say his name, man, I stupidly kept calling him Kampa all the time. But out of nowhere, John comes up behind him, gives him a stun grenade, and knocks him out, saying he could have burned down the entire building. He's going to sleep. Upon entering the room, it was full of figures of himself. The redhead challenges him and tells him not to dare enter there. That was the collection he valued more than his life, but John was uncomfortable with it. So he removed their heads to be able to tolerate them. The next day, only news about John appeared to Hugo. He was definitely alive. They're going to take his order, but he immediately realizes it was John Wayne, who had possessed another body to communicate with him. He thinks he must find John before anyone else, but he has no clue where he might be. Later, in the divine painting of Ares, they talk about the appearance of someone who defeated the domestic gods. They also say that Hugo's blessed one had canceled his plans to return, putting the goat god on alert. Also, they found a disciple unconscious who was only in his underwear. According to witnesses, he argued with a handsome man. Because of that, he calms down a bit since it wasn't Legion, but there was a possibility it was him. And if this continued, his position would be threatened. In the Gemini-affiliated hospital, there's this old man. At the Gemini-affiliated hospital, there's this old man. He is complaining that they couldn't leave their son in that condition. But they calm him down because he was sent to fix what had happened. Gemini disciple, S-rank permafrost. Then there are the two friends at the supermarket. Jimin asks if he really thinks it could be John, but the redhead doesn't deny it. Physically, he is completely different. Besides, Lee John was a hero who saved humanity, not a thug. A blizzard appears that shakes both of them. He was a thief, a Scorpio disciple who could use an extraordinary speed, which helped him steal all their items and wallets in 5 seconds. Not even an S-class could catch him, but someone hits him and knocks him to the floor. It was Gion. He had forgotten to tell them to buy some chicken, and the bald guy, who isn't bald, shows up, paraphrasing that it was impressive, since Scorpio disciples were very hard to catch. From his energy, he felt like a normal disciple, so next time, they should call a cop. A loud noise shakes everyone present. The thief thinks that earthquake was perfect to escape, but at the moment of fleeing, a calamity appears. That didn't matter to him, since not even calamities could catch him. However, he is caught by one. The supermarket activates the drill. A calamity was inside. It asks civilians who didn't have blessings to evacuate the building quickly due to the appearance of the Red Queen. It has turned into a red zone. When everyone falls into despair, a child is stalked by a calamity, and the protagonist arrives to rescue him. He didn't understand why there were calamities in a market, but that didn't matter. At that moment, some time had passed, so he'll do a little warm-up. The scene shifts to the Goat King. He is informed that a calamity appeared in his supermarket. The calamity was the Spider Queen. He believes that was the creature they couldn't defeat. He thinks it will be very difficult to face a red-level calamity alone. Here it is explained that there are 6 levels of calamity. The blue grade is God's safe level. Green level means safe areas. Yellow level means caution areas. Orange level means dangerous areas that must be secured. Red level, which are areas governed by calamities. And black level, which are the destruction of humanity. That spider appeared, so the supermarket turns into a red zone. The goat leader tells them the only option they have is to bury the supermarket. No one should know. If they find out that because of them, the spider was there, they could suffer losses of believers and power. They will say that everyone who was there died, and that they will send disciples to the place to bury the entire building. Inside, the bald guy who isn't really bald was freezing the calamities, feeling proud because that's why he was an S rank, but the calamities easily break the ice. Jean appears and tells him to move, to give way to the professionals, and starts throwing sodas like bullets. And on top of that, cuts everyone with his skills. Thanks to that, he gains new abilities and will be able to create artifacts. The bald guy complains how it was possible that such a weak person couldn't finish off those calamities. Not even he had been able to do anything. But he realizes that he was the person they had been looking for, the disciples of his divine frame. And it was clearly him, since he wore the same clothes as them, and also had the Gemini insignia. He shouts that clearly. That was the reason he was so strong, because of the divine artifact. But in the scene, the Spider Queen appears. John doesn't hesitate for a second and attacks. Everyone present is stunned. It was crazy that a single person could face a red-level calamity without any divine artifact. The redhead and the bald guy receive a message from the captain telepathically. They had to get out of that building quickly. The Ares guys were going to bury the building completely, and they had no way to stop them. They are searching desperately, hiding his mistakes with the Spider Queen. The bald guy had teleportation abilities, so the two could get out without problems. The redhead, seeing the situation, refuses to follow orders. There were too many people in that place, and his best friend was there too. That rank gives arguments that there was no other way out. He could only teleport two people. He had no intention of being buried alive there, so he wouldn't be bothered. He couldn't ignore the orders of the divine squad captain. For that reason, he would get rid of the burdens so he wouldn't have to worry about them, threatening to kill his friend. The two go on guard, activating their powers, and a scratch hits the bald guy's back. The friends tell him what was happening. They had to heal the wounded, save the people, and prevent them from being buried. That rank comes out of the rubble shouting that they were going to die, but he was going to survive. But the Spider Queen captures him and eats him. Jian, seeing the scene, asks them to go help the wounded. He will take care of the Spider Queen. It will only take him a moment. From Yang Wei's perspective, his seal, for some reason, wasn't working, and a great power emanated over the place. It was a giant snake. People run out asking for help, reporting that there were injured people inside and that the spider had been killed by a man. Yang Wei is surprised, wondering how someone could do that. Not even he, one of the two chosen, could do it. It was impossible. He had to check for himself what had happened. He couldn't believe it. The Spider Queen, which was a red-level calamity, already lay at his feet, slain. He couldn't find a logical reason for what happened. He hears a familiar voice, and indeed, it was Hugo's, but it was impossible that he did something like that. A soft breeze of fear runs through his body upon hearing the words, "Hello, Juan Carlos. How are you, dick sucker?" John says, asking why his expression was so disturbed if they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Outside the supermarket, the redhead gets an idea that he can indeed be John because of his movements. At that moment, Hugo arrives and informs us that he's the redhead's father and was very worried. But he receives no answers, and Jimin comments that John must be fine. This unsettles and surprises Hugo, who asks him to tell him in detail what happened. An explosion is heard inside the supermarket. The goat had attacked John without warning because it felt cornered, but it calms down since it thought he was Ollie. John, but he looks very different and wasn't covered in scars. He expresses how he dared not to know his place and go against him. He had to prepare for what was going to happen, but the protagonist strikes with a blow to the stomach and, while in the air, takes the opportunity to land another hit on the ground. He accuses him of stealing their divine artifacts and belongings, even forging his will. So he's going to kill them all and destroy everything they have. Yang Wei says that the way he talks and acts was very similar, and he couldn't see his moves. He thinks it could be John, but if it really was John, he would prove it by summoning the divine god, the Jade Emperor, Ares, using all his skills, filling him with chains, and throwing an enormous amount of swords, declaring that he hadn't wasted time. In 20 years, he was clearly stronger than before. But the mound of swords breaks, and Leon lands a direct hit to his face. He had finally recognized him. Indeed, he had returned from hell. Thanks to defeating him, new abilities awakened that he was ready to use. The god Ares was astonished and trembling, exclaiming that this was impossible. John was quite merciful, so he would make him feel what he had felt for 20 years. Then Hugo arrives on the scene, clearly the only human capable of doing that was John. Finding Jean Wei's body, he wonders what John could do now. Meanwhile, the protagonist is inside Ares' Museum of Divine Objects, but within the premises. There are only fake things, except for what John was looking for. Taken out of its place, immediately all the guards around the area surround him, threatening that if he doesn't return the artifact, they will have to use force. He still refuses and attacks them all with a simple move, activating a land, which was this incredibly strong little thing. A message gives an alert. That door was protected with divine artifacts. Hugo, seeing people running, thinks he arrived a little late and spots him. He runs toward him and starts talking to the guy behind John, crying. He thinks his scars had healed. He looked a little different, but he was glad he was alive, and John kicks him. He says if he wants him to beat him up, so he recognizes his friend a bit. Hugo cries, hugging him. He was really alive. He hits him again and confirms it really was John, and the Sagittarius god appears. He questions that John was alive, so he'll see what happens if he shoots an arrow at him. But Hugo tries to calm him down. John expresses that when he left the tower, his house was sold, his will was arranged, and all his relics had disappeared. He was too angry, so he would have to give him a little hit. He hears a crowd in the distance, shouting about the man who stole the things, but John had only stolen a few small items. The guards knew he wouldn't be a match for this guy, so they called him monstrosity to counter him, and the beast of riches appears on the scene. Piku, the protagonist, knows what he has to do. He asks for his divine sword to show his true power. A land, that sword had awakened through the power of the serpent. Thanks to that, he can clearly see the beast's weak points. Hugo thinks it was incredible. He always threw himself at his enemies without fear of anything. He was proud. But the beast crushes him with its kick. No, just kidding. John lifts it without much trouble. It was his turn to attack, cutting off the beast's leg. And in his second attack, he unleashes his power, not only defeating the beast, but destroying the entire place with a single strike. Hugo believes that was the same power he had 20 years ago. A message appears to John. If he wanted to tame that beast, he agrees, and Piku was now his. Plus, it could shrink, celebrating that he could now store more treasures. Then they start arguing. John calls him a traitor. Hugo thinks he can't say that, since he was very worried about him all those years, but John believes that was a filthy lie. He got married, had a happy family, had children, and enjoyed life. Meanwhile, he was trapped in a demon-filled prison. He should feel ashamed and regretful. He couldn't even recognize his friend when he saw him. But he shouldn't feel so bad, after all. Divorce wasn't that bad. Hugo says he wasn't divorced. He didn't want to talk about his wife. He asks about what happened with the tower. At that moment, he was outside, and when he entered, the others already had the Crimson Eye's head. He also asks him not to tell his kids, because they are fans of him. John begins to narrate his terrible story. He was stabbed in the back and thrown into a trap. That was a place plagued with countless calamities. On top of the numerous calamities that appeared non-stop, the dead Crimson Eye had also come back to life. It turns out the Crimson Eye they saw wasn't the real one. The real Crimson Eye was deep inside the tower. He managed to defeat it, but the real problem wasn't the Crimson Eye, but the tower's administrator, who was a demon capable of reviving dead calamities. After 20 years, he somehow managed to escape. At the end of his journey, he was able to kill the administrator, and after exhausting all his strength, he remembers dying there, but when he woke up, the calamities had disappeared and he gained his current abilities. The truth was quite confusing, but he only knows one thing. The bastard who stabbed him knew the structure of the demon tower. They're going to punish the constellations, but the one who stabbed him will suffer in the worst way. For that, he needs to form a necessary team to be able to hit him properly. Thanks to the Spider Queen's fragment, he creates a rank B seahorse. It has several qualities, but Hugo thinks it was pretty good. However, for being high rank, it didn't seem that impressive. John expresses that he had no idea how many materials were used to make it. In fact, he was also thinking about creating another one for Hugo, but now, because of his comments, he should forget about it. Hugo, starts to fold it. It was incredible. He really was a genius for being able to create divine artifacts. John takes out his unique divine artifact, the Golden Fleece safe. He heard that Hugo didn't have money, so he brought it to fund him. Hugo shouts that he wasn't poor. John thinks that the higher the rank, the better the artifacts they will create, but they realize that no one there could use it. He curses everything because he had already sent a declaration of war over the radio. Well, they just had to find another way to face him. The scene changes. Korea, Blue House. Several heads of the Divine Squads are gathered. Oliver, from the Leo Divine Squad, was arguing with Choi, captain of the Gemini Divine Squad. They're talking about what happened with the Spider Queen. They throw in each other's faces everything they did wrong. The two are about to fight, but an alert arrives. Something big had happened. On the news, they received a message with photos of Yanwei and a note that said, "I'm back." From the late Lee John, Hugo is challenging him. How could he do that? And on top of that, he announced it everywhere. Clearly, it was a declaration of war, and it was too cruel to kill someone, but John hadn't killed Yanwei. He had just turned him into this little plush. His abilities had improved a lot from the experience of that battle. Now it was possible for him to keep Yanwei's soul. He also passes him. The dagger with which he was stabbed, it had a special grade. It couldn't be Yanwei's. It must belong to someone else. He will stop by the Divine Artifacts shop to find out. More information at the disaster scene he left behind. The dagger with which he was stabbed had a special grade. It couldn't have been Yanwei's. It had to belong to someone else. He will stop by the Divine Artifacts shop to find out. More information about the disaster scene left behind. John is informed that the Aries saint, Sophie Marty, had a slight chance of John being alive. She only thinks they are bad jokes. She reports that they will go to the Divine Artifacts shop to sell their items and earn money, so they can buy artifacts at the auction, but another saint had also requested to participate in the auction. He was Stephen Marker, who was obsessed with John's divine artifacts and was the Leo saint, the protagonist. Meanwhile, he was in the city heading to the Divine Artifacts shop. I said Divine Artifact many times, sorry. The place had an S-rank appraiser. The redhead had given him the tip. Thanks to his boss. The boss wanted to meet the person who defeated the Spider Queen. John, for bringing him, gives him an A-class dagger. And they arrive at the venue at the same time. People are amazed to see such a beautiful person. It was the Aquarius saint, Saint Sophie. She asked to enter, but she couldn't. Someone was inside before her. Outwardly she accepts it, but inside she was furious. Inside, the appraiser asks about the item, who made it, and upon learning it was made by the protagonist, he thinks it might have some connection to the hero legend. He asks Sunjae to please wait outside. They had to talk alone, just the two of them, about the phrase. Not many people knew that John was a legendary producer. The artifact he brought had countless fakes, but this one was different. He feels a work of art by Lee John and can recognize it because he was a disciple of the hero. John is confused. He doesn't remember having any student like that, so he thinks of hitting him for scamming, but he handed him a notebook. John remembers him. He was a rookie who had followed him 20 years ago. He had a wonderful eye for items and passes that book on to him. Since he was young, he was leaving Lee John's path in his hands. The book glows, but they are interrupted because the saint was outside, complaining that they couldn't keep her waiting. She was the saint of Aries forcefully enters, and upon entering realizes that the man was very handsome. She needed to get closer, but Laura and the power of the serpent make her kneel in fright. She felt as if hundreds of snakes had coiled around her. Then she runs desperately out of that place. John finds out that she was Saint Sophie and laughs. He hadn't recognized her because of so many surgeries. On the outside, she must have changed, but her heart full of trash and plagues never will. In an alley, Saint Sophie is having memories of the ancient eye. She thinks that power was overwhelming. It resembled his greatly, and she orders him to return to the pawn shop and simply kill everyone. The appraiser deserves it for sidelining her, and the man for bringing back a trauma from the past. She will give him a divine artifact, which will grant him the powers of a god. And as expected, she obeyed, since there is no way to refuse a request from the 12 celestial beings. Then, the redhead walks calmly through the downtown district and notices that the water has a slight degree of mana. Bodies of water begin appearing throughout the area. The redhead confronts the guard about why they were using an ability in a neutral zone, but she was only following the will of heaven, activating a divine object and trapping all the people in bubbles of water. She will now take care of the appraiser and the man in the shop. The appraiser is imprisoned in a water prison, and John was under the guard's knife. Saint had told her to kill them, but if they apologized and bought the divine artifacts, they might be forgiven, and John takes the knife and breaks it with just his fingers. They had told him not to move, and they attack him with a water dragon, but John dissolves the attack with just a jab. Seeing John's strength, she pulls out her best weapon, something made with Saint's mana, an orange rank summon, the water wolf. John grabs some daggers and stabs the wolves again and again. The guard was surprised. He had finished off her best weapons, and seeing John's gaze, she runs away instantly. The redhead enters. The saint had told him to kill them, but if they apologized and bought the divine artifacts, they might be forgiven. And John takes the knife and breaks it with just his fingers. They had told him not to move, and they attack him with a water dragon, but John dissolves the attack with just a jab. Seeing John's strength, he pulls out his best weapon, something made with the saint's mana, a rank orange summoning, the water wolf. John grabs some daggers and stabs the wolves again and again. The guards were surprised. He had finished off their best weapons, and seeing John's gaze, they immediately run away. The redhead enters. Describing what had happened outside, they had to leave that place as more people could come who would recognize their movements. Anywhere, he asks if it was possible. He was the chosen one, right? He thanks him, asks him to come back whenever he wants. Then, the two are eating ice cream, and this guy arrives. He was the captain of Choi's divine squad. He was delighted to meet him. He had heard many great things about him. He was searching for talents. He tells him about one of John's 8 divine artifacts. They will soon be up for auction, so they could go talk about a deal he has for him at that place, and only he can take him because that place was a private venue. The scene changes to a fortress city. Drachma was gathered with the blessed of Aries, the blessed of Leo, and also the blessed of Sagittarius. Hugo, Sophie goes to talk to Hugo, trying to annoy him. He used to be the most handsome man of all the saints, and he was strong before, but everything had changed as his disciples were very disappointed in him. Hugo ignores her, but she throws a comment. He couldn't do whatever he wanted. If he did it again, he could lose his children, just like he lost his wife. She wasn't dead, but because of his incompetence, his family was falling apart. Hugo didn't like her words at all. Unleashing his abilities, throwing a punch, but Sophie blocks it without any problem. She makes it clear what her position was. He was too weak to raise his voice to her, and just as she's about to attack him, John appears, dissolving his ability, and taps her on the forehead, stunning her. He asks Hugo not to follow him everywhere. Did he like him? And that girl also followed him everywhere. Maybe she liked him too. We see the memories of the saint. She hated John, was afraid of his horrible scarred face, his personality, and his cold eyes. One day, 20 years ago, Leon arrives, demanding how he could be doing that. And his cold eyes. One day, 20 years ago, Leon arrives demanding to know how he could be doing that. She had sent her to the rear to treat the wounded. But the people, assuming most had lost arms and legs, try to protect her for her mistake. They will immediately go to heal those people. But she screams to be let go. She didn't care if those people died. No one would care. In fact, they should be happy to give their lives to the saints. And John slaps her sharply, saying she needed a serious beating to teach her values. Then she wakes up and screams when she sees he is in front of her. They thought they had underestimated her by tying her up with only ropes, but Ojin realizes and hits her for being foolish. She laughs because she had an ability that activates when she's hit. Her body would boil in acid. But, as we know, the protagonist has the power of healing and regeneration, and now it was time to settle scores. She had sent someone to kill him, so she would face the consequences. By hitting her many times, his abilities improve and he gains divine status, which allows him to have disciples. He doesn't fully understand, but leaves the rest to Hugo because he will go to the auction. At that very moment, the Leo saint, Stephen, arrives and immediately activates his power. Seeing that Sophie was captured, Hugo had no intention of explaining what happened. He was only there for the auction, and he shouldn't be there. Just to get John's weapons, since they wouldn't make him stronger than John. Hearing those words, Stephen thinks he had to know his place. He shouldn't keep talking about John in front of him, since now he was the strongest of all. A disciple shouting reports that someone was buying all the items. The saint had no time to waste with Hugo and immediately goes to see what was happening. He gives him his last advice. He had to control his personality if he wanted to keep living in the VIP room. John is buying item after item that were his. The kind of glasses had given him the option to buy whatever he wanted. To join his divine panel, he offers all kinds of conveniences. If he joins Ares, he could be the successor. He would have wealth and honor, all for free. But John thought they were asking him to become the lackey of a poor divine god. At that moment, they handed him a divine artifact that the guy with glasses had bought. Scared, he asked for that relic to be returned, since it belonged to John. And someone was obsessed with his objects. They could get hurt if he found out. And the door opened. Stephen entered with a confrontational tone, asking who dared to lay hands on his items. The captain explained the situation and apologized. They would return his item. In fact, they were going to gift it to him for the trouble, but John didn't think the same. He wasn't going to give anything back. It was his. But he could sell it for 200 billion, Stephen laughed. He thought Gemini was full of cowards, but he was different. And for his great bravery, he would give him a gift using an attack with the spirit of Leo. Clearly that attack could finish anyone, but the protagonist was clearly not just anyone. He thought it was his turn to give his gift. The saint, for the first time in a long time, felt fear, but at that moment they announced a new item at the auction. Stephen got excited and left, since finally he would be as strong as John. The only thing that made them different in the past was that John had a weapon. He was convinced that what was in front of his eyes was the strongest artifact, which would proclaim him the strongest, and in the distance, a calamity dragon. He also planned to get that artifact, that bone. It was an artifact John had gotten in a high-ranked tower. The bids had outrageous prices. Everyone wanted the legendary weapon. John was watching his money grow. It was quite a spectacle, and Stephen's voice came from the stage. He had offered 1 trillion. 1 trillion, my friend. 1 trillion $1 trillion for that item. And since no one bid higher, it sold for $1 trillion when finally this Stephen was happy to get the most precious thing in the world to him. Everyone started chanting his name. Then a wall of the residue broke. It was a calamity demanding the divine item, attacking Stephen, who bats it away and sends it to the other side of the city. Because of that, the magic tower began to collapse. If those debris fell into the city, it would crumble as a consequence. All the disciples gathered and released manna to prevent it. They tried to stop the debris from falling, but at that rate, they couldn't destroy them all. At that moment, the Sagittarius saint stepped in. Everyone thanked him, but another calamity appeared that could use the bodies of its victims to control them. Hugo charged, but in a distraction, the other calamity appeared. Luckily, Gian kicked him and insulted Hugo because he was still too bad at fighting. He felt very uncomfortable having such a weak friend. Hugo defended himself, thinking he did the best he could. Stephen enters the scene, demanding why they were interrupting his experience with his divine artifact and used his royal skill against the calamities and the people present. That was his famous lightning storm that couldn't be destroyed. He used it to test his new weapon. People commented that they were saved. He was the strongest man in the world, even stronger than John. When he struck the calamity, nothing happened at all. He tried again repeatedly, but nothing happened, and the calamity threw him through the air. On the other hand, Gian was very angry. How dare they lock him up in that place? But since he was already there, he would take care of the beast. He had taken people hostage. He couldn't attack him so easily. But John had a plan to free them by force. Hugo thought then he couldn't do it. John believed from the beginning he would have to handle them alone. He had no expectations for him. But Hugo would still cover his back. The protagonist entered attacking with his black whips, freeing everyone present from the mind control, but he got overconfident. The mind control could regenerate, but Hugo was there to reinforce his strategy, and John managed to position himself ideally for his big strike. Thanks to that, they gained new and better abilities. Meanwhile, Stephen was badly wounded. He was about to reinforce his strategy, and John managed to position himself perfectly for his big strike. Thanks to that, he gained new and better abilities. On the other hand, Stephen was badly wounded. Wondering why it wasn't working, the great bone was being cornered and John appeared to kill the calamity. The beast sensed the danger instantly. It left the Leo saint to focus on that man, but John used his new skill, unleashed all his power and created an instant pressure against his opponent. Stephen, seeing this, thought only one man could achieve that. The protagonist was thrilled to meet the person who had been messing around in his name. They attacked him with a super bone, but he stopped it easily and with one hand broke the top part, and also landed a blow that shook the city. In fact, he pierced the city with Stephen's body, and since everyone was safe now, he used Hucha to collect everything worth taking. He used it and told Hugo that he had someone he knew who had come with him to the auction. His name was Sunjai. He was young but quite brilliant. Hugo couldn't understand it. He had been careful to keep his children uninvolved. Since they were John fans, his family could turn into chaos. He immediately asked him to sever ties with Gemini, as it was a society with only evil intentions. Besides, its disciples were also bad. But a dad made himself heard. He said he had indeed spoken with the name Lee. John to that man, but there was still a whip left, which attacked him, but Lime swallowed it. John demanded he spit out. It could be dangerous. He shouldn't be so hungry and eat the first thing he found. Sunjai, seeing what happened, recognized Lime, an artifact of the hero Jian, and the power, the skills shown earlier. Also, the only person with whom his outcast father acted friendly as a lackey. He asked if it could really be Li John, crying with emotion. Then, in the United States, headquarters of the Divine Leo Frame, they were discussing the incident of the attack on their saint. They still hadn't found him, so they had to do something. But she didn't want to look for him. In fact, she was going back home. She didn't care what was happening, since her brother told her there was a cool guy at her house. She was Kain Yoha, one of the 10 stars of the Divine Leo constellation. The news only talks about John and what happened. Saint Sophie is hiding in her house since the day before. She was going to give a lecture, and the necklace John put on her came to light with a message that said, "Tell everyone the truth from 20 years ago. I'm not dead." She didn't know what to do. They had put her in a very complicated situation. The most sensible thing in that situation would be to give a statement. What happened 20 years ago in the news announces that Sophie will give an explanation soon. And an unrevealed character thinks that won't be good at all. In the Sagittarius Sanctuary, Hugo's house, they're practicing archery, and, as always, John humiliates Hugo. Yang Wei treats him like a king, which makes Hugo angry, since they don't even bring him a glass of water. The pro investigates his sanctuary and divine constellation. He realizes he needs members. Also, he had an appointment. He had to meet with many people that day. The guy with glasses is convincing him to join the Gemini divine constellation and offers him all the money at his disposal. That makes him upset, but it was a unique opportunity for him. So after much thought, he accepts, but with one condition, that they give him the badge he carries and lend him the fire forge of their divine constellation. He also needed that badge to be able to use the benefits that come with being part of the Gemini divine constellation. And he was the kind of person who needed something tangible to trust. So what does he say? He has another appointment, so he must hurry his decision. The guards couldn't accept the disrespect. And on the redhead side, he was super happy because John had given him a dagger, but this guy appears with 2 friends to steal it. The blonde was a Gemini disciple, John. Chihuahua, but we'll call him Glenn. They were trying to provoke him, but he couldn't do anything since he was the son of the Libra saint and he knew it. That's why they behave that way. He shouts for them to give it back, but the 2 friends grab him and throw him against the table. The blonde says he was sure everyone would call him a coward for yelling so much. They knew he was a fan of the hero John. That's why he was just as pathetic as him, or maybe even more pathetic. Because of his sleeping mother, the redhead loses control upon hearing those words, unleashing his power and activating an ability that made John appear, who headbutts the blonde. He is surprised to see Sanjay. He was about to sign the contract to join Gemini. But he showed up there, and since he was already there anyway, that meant those guys were threatening his beloved nephew. How dare they hurt him? He will show them what happens when they harm a loved one. As for the friends, they were already stunned on the floor. Glenn kept telling him he couldn't do that. He was the son of the company president. He repeated it over and over, but John was determined to teach him a lesson. Glenn thought he couldn't humiliate him like that, so he activated his paralysis bull ability. The protagonist thought maybe he had something more interesting. But no, he suppressed his ability and would show him how a real power is used. He tells the redhead that when he's in danger, His uncle will have his back. Nona appears on the scene, whom Sunjae happily introduces. He has overcome countless calamities, a hero who saved humanity. Again and again, the protagonist of the movie they were watching. Again and again when they were kids, he was Lee John Nona. He couldn't believe it. Rubbing his eyes, he might be a player, but he was too handsome. 20 years ago, he was covered in scars, but the important thing wasn't his appearance. He was glad he was safe. He introduces himself and asks a favor. He knew it was a bit bold to say this, but it was urgent. But just as he's about to give the message, a calamity appears inside, and Nona cuts it in half. He couldn't make his proper proposal if there were calamities nearby. The alarm goes off again. Calamities had appeared inside the city. Everyone had to evacuate and seek shelter immediately. Nona was desperate. She had to do it even faster. She wanted to finish as quickly as possible to propose to John. He had been watching to make sure she was safe, but they weren't strong enough. As quickly as possible to propose marriage to John. He had been watching to make sure he was safe, but they weren't strong enough. They even had a better sense of battle than Hugo, but in a moment of carelessness, a calamity was about to attack Nona. The calamity expresses that they were quite strong. Normal humans couldn't dodge their attacks, she'll admit that. Especially as a pet, John thinks that moment was perfect. He needed to create believers, so they would have some fun. He asks his nephews to take care of the calamities, because he knows they are strong, and now they will have fun together. They manage to reach it and hit it, but John doesn't cause any damage. He asks if that was all it had, but she replies that clearly it wasn't. They were saving the civilians, but Nona thinks Uncle John was definitely very strong. But his opponent was a fantastic race, the most dangerous among the calamities. She thinks she couldn't lose him again. The calamity believes maybe it had hit him very hard, but John emerges from the flames, which were quite strong, and he was going to use them as a gas burner for his forge. Now that he had some flames, he couldn't wait to use his hammer. The calamity doesn't know what he was planning, but it won't let him use it. And Nona appears to stop her, but her attack is useless. The calamity, with one hand, slams her against the wall of the building and orders her pet to devour her. But John appears, warning that he will kill her if she touches his niece again. Seeing the fear directly in her eyes, she senses death, which makes her transform into her final evolution. Fantastic Beast. Hell Wings, Danger Level Red. In honor of her power, she will destroy him with a single attack. She is surprised. He blocked her hellfire with just a vinyl glove, and now she will pay the price of setting the city on fire with the fire of his smithy. For the rest of her life, John delivers a purification strike repeatedly. But you can't purify someone who is already dead. He had hit her many times. The lizard has given up, becoming his slave immediately. Nona approaches, and he remembers her words about her proposal. He gets a little nervous, but Nona had doubts about his story. She couldn't understand how all the saints had survived that day. Except for him. I thought he was the strongest of all. The only theory that could exist was that they set a trap for him. John is surprised. It was to be expected from his friend's daughter. She was right. He was betrayed 20 years ago. He was one of the 12 saints, and it was clearly because he stood out above all of them. He killed the Crimson Eye, the greatest calamity of all. Now, they could control the world. But they only had one obstacle. They felt a lot of pity. He was locked up for 20 years. They even took his glory for themselves, although he was the one who saved humanity. They gave the calm. At that moment, he was already fine. And that was the only thing that mattered. And he will see the last item on today's agenda. Saint Sophie was giving a statement. She was between a rock and a hard place, but she had to tell the truth. If she didn't, John would finish her off and tell everyone that the real person who killed the Crimson Eye that day was Lee John. Everyone falls into doubt, asking multiple questions about what the truth really was. Then, a sinister shadow appears behind Sophie. It was Jean Louis Morin, the French saint of cancer. Turning off the microphone, he asks Sophie if she had gone crazy. He explains that she had to act as usual if she didn't want the world to see how he would rip her throat out right then and there, and that she should stay silent. He turns the microphone back on and gives explanations that Saint Sophie was just speaking nonsense at that moment. he apologizes. What they had said earlier was simply the truth. But the journalists were not happy with the answer. So he was willing to use his power to silence them all. And John appears, kicking him. Sophie screams that he was here. And on top of that, they also give him an elbow as a bonus. John demands explanations from the rotten crab about why he stopped his conference. The Saint of Cancer and the others present didn't understand and didn't know who was standing before their eyes. The protagonist claims he was the hero legend. Everyone bursts out laughing, since he didn't resemble him in the slightest. He seemed quite weak, and John was going to prove to the crab that he was, and to the journalists as well. He asks Sophie to spit out the whole truth in front of everyone. But a purple aura invades the building. The Cancer Saint had unleashed his god and would give a welcome to his former companion. At home, Hugo is happily eating a bowl of ramen and watches the news. A man claiming to be Jian is fighting the Cancer Saint. The Cancer Saint shouts, "Did you only learn to dodge for 20 years?" Jian yells back, "Did you only learn to make clones?" For the last 20 years, the Cancer Saint creates a whirlwind of power, which drained the soul power from the people present. He had simply decided to use his blessing to finish him off. John asks if he had stabbed him that day. Jean Lewis replies, "Would the world's hero hold a grudge against someone responsible from 20 years ago? People would think he was just a thug, and his ability wasn't simple clones. He had created clones with the life force of the journalists. Therefore, if he destroys any clone, they could die, attacking him with all the clones." But Jian had swapped his body for the tail and strikes the real one. Jean Lewis knows he was only a part of the real one, but he had a big prize. For him, he pulls out his core from his body, giving it to the snake, and everything returns to normal. Jean thinks it was a very good strategy, but he shouldn't count his victories yet. He still had cards to play. John believes he knew he couldn't just stand by if he was defeated, and a call from Hugo comes in. He shouts, "How could you do that? I was watching the news." He had just gotten rid of one of Jean Lewis's high-ranking schizophrenics, which unleashed a missile barrage. It is explained that the Marmot missiles, between the disappearance of Legion, Capricorn, and Genesis, worked together to create a decisive, catastrophic class weapon for calamities humans couldn't face and became humanity's aces. And well, Jean Lewis made them fire. Aces of humanity. And well, Jean Lewis made them fire. Automatically, if their life signs were cut off, the protagonist thinks and has the perfect plan to prevent any destruction. He looks at Saint Sophie. The city alarm sends the message. Everyone must evacuate the area. Not even a drop will fall on them in the next few minutes. Chaos breaks out among them. But John carries the Ares Saint on his shoulder. He knows she can turn anything into liquid. She yells at him, "How the hell is he going to do that?" John tells her that if she can't, then everyone will die. So she has to try hard. In the air, the divine god of Aquarius was surprised by the situation. He casts all his buffs, so his chosen saint won't die. Royal skill, goddess's tear. He succeeded, and John lets her fall freely. She had done a very good job. But if those fragments touch the ground, they would also unleash chaos. So he should give a big thanks to the witch. He contacts Hugo and demands he lend him his ability. John thinks that should be enough. He had the power of the Sagittarius Saint, and the Ares Saint cast a teleportation spell, sending all the fragments to another location. Everyone was safe, and the fragments were thrown to the divine frame location of the Gemini Saint. Then, at Xianwei, they're discussing how Leo hasn't appeared, and they have defeated the Saint. They knocked down Cancer and blocked the missiles. The protagonist appears breaking through the roof, expressing what they were, whispering about him. They meet with the captain and Hugo, who were there to recover their money. Although he was sure to leave a will, all his assets have been donated to things they shouldn't have. Most have been donated to the witch. They say it was hard to oppose the Korean government. Their first option was to give the money to Hugo, but since he wasn't Korean, they couldn't give the money to a foreigner. Also, because of what happened in previous years, he had lost a lot of credibility. John hits them because they chose a witch over his friend. Who did they think they would have looked down on his friend? He knows it was bullshit. He seemed like their slave, but they couldn't treat him that way, even if he is a saint without money and absolutely ruined. The more he talks, the angrier he gets. He asks Hugo to be strong and demands that all his belongings be returned. But on the scene, shut up, is heard. It was the voice of Jays, the Gemini saint. She was not going to return anything. They were the owners of the bank accounts. Besides, there was destruction in her palace. She would have to use that money for repairs because of her fault. And now that she has him in front of her, she will get rid of him by summoning the fairy spirit. This spirit was one of the strongest. But John didn't care and grabbed her, throwing her through the air. Seeing the scene, the fairy tries to escape, but John grabs her by the head and tells everyone that clearly this was not the Gemini saint. And well, after seeing all that, they clearly had to return the money. Otherwise, something very similar would happen to them. Leaving the building, they go happily to recover John's belongings and also had an idea of where the witch could be. Back at Sunji's house, they were eating and the fairy queen was trapped in a safe. She had to answer everything they asked her. That strange witch still hadn't appeared. But he knows she doesn't want to show up. In fact, it's not that she doesn't want to, but because she can't. He will give her a chance to say exactly where she was, seeing the power she transmitted. He points to a figure. John knew it. He felt the stench of that witch in that house. He uses his third sense, and indeed Jay's was in that figure. We are told that from the very first minute. She knew John left the tower and didn't know what happened. So she decided to investigate by becoming that figure. But since John had broken her, she couldn't return to her original body. She asks her summoning to help her, but it didn't want to. She asks Sanjay to help her. It was a heavenly order, but he couldn't obey either. However, it was his duty. He was the enemy of her divine frame. The redhead, upon hearing these words, decides to stop being the divine frame of Gemini. Decides to stop being the divine Gemini frame. And he had to face his hero. It was better to stop following her. And when he threw down his badge, a loud crash appeared. For the act committed, a divine punishment would be given. The saint asks him to reconsider and ask for forgiveness. He was the contender to take her place, and John was a despicable man. But he asked her to be quiet. They would give up anything for their own convenience. But in contrast, his hero was different. He would always save those in danger. He dared not look down on him, shouting those words with blood in his eyes, nose, and mouth by the divine power of Gemini. The goddess was about to get rid of the redhead. However, John uses abyssal slash. This causes all the subjects of the divine Gemini frame to lose their powers. He thanks him for saving him. The saint demands to know what he had done. His power had completely vanished. An explanation is given about what had happened. The divine gods expend a lot of resources entering this reality. That is why they always provide a saint, and that saint distributes the strength among all their disciples. In other words, the god is the power plant. The saint would be like a power transformer, and the disciples would be the outlets. Therefore, John had cut any connection to the main source. That was a crab's ability, and he had stolen it. She refuses to believe his explanation. That was impossible. If he did that, the goddess would intervene, but that was John's plan. Already on stage, the goddess Freja was gathering power to launch her attack. However, John pulls out a fragment of the cancer core. The goddess was surprised. He lamented, not having any blessing, because if he had one, he could blow them all away, but he could settle for the abyssal scythe. Attacking the goddess, the spectators were shocked. Could he hurt a god? The scythe breaks, and the divine goddess Freja gathers all her power and summons portals everywhere, but a halt is heard. It was Hugo and the god of Gemini proclaiming that the divine gods could not interfere in that world with their true forms. Clearly, the god Sagittarius was no match to enforce that justice. But they were not the only ones opposing their interference. And multiple messages from all the gods begin to appear, lending their power. For breaking the rules, several chains surrounded the goddess, inflicting punishment. Without saying goodbye, protesting that she will never forget what happened that day, Jehovah asks her to bring her older brother next time. After what happened, he thanks Hugo, but that was just the beginning of what he had planned. He will not rest until he shoots an arrow in the head of that goddess's brother. Hugo had also gotten what he asked for from the Yin and Yang Palace. That building had maximum security, but he used infiltration. hid, and stole. Upon opening the scroll, Leon manages to register the affiliated spirits. Berserker, legendary type, giant of the giant kings. Jotun, legendary type, and the hard warrior, legendary type. They were affiliates of Gemini, but they wanted to be part of Leon, although he did not trust their loyalty much. So he asked them for proof, and they gave him Jay's body. With that proof, he will accept them all. Jays complains that this is a nightmare, but John yells at him to be quiet. His goddess has completely abandoned him. He asks if she stabbed him, and after hanging her for a long time, says it was Virgo. Well, folks, here are the saints on screen so you don't get confused about constellations. And also to say that if you're enjoying this kind of content, subscribe and like the video. Thank you very, very much. He expresses that he should have told him that earlier. He shouldn't have endured so much pain, and for the information. He will return his body, but by mistake gives his body to the fairy, who was very happy. That also made Nona angry. Then at Hugo's house, they're deciphering contracts for their summons, double S ranks. The Gemini Saint was locked up with John's other relics and the new members of his house. Were very excited. In fact, they were shouting with excitement. Hugo thinks it was the first time he had seen summons so happy. But the three ask him not to interfere. He was just the errand boy. But John corrects them. They were misunderstanding things. He wasn't a messenger boy, but a slave. They, astonished, ask Hugo not to speak then, if he was a slave then. He still wonders why they had chosen him instead of the divine Gemini god. They couldn't stand the tyranny of that god. And it wasn't just them, but the other gods and their commanders as well. Currently, due to the unknown civilization that fuels the calamities, humanity has lost half the world. At first glance, it might seem like the saints and calamities are bouncing on a tightrope, but the reality was very different. They were at the point where they couldn't reclaim the land that had already been taken by the unknown civilization, which is still seeking to gain allies. The civilization is beneath Gemini's sea, but at the bottom of the Pacific, it must be right, next to the unknown civilization, so they'll have to check the situation and come up with a plan. The three brothers kneel before him and swear loyalty. They will support all his plans. John thinks it's impressive. Little by little, he's gathering high-ranking domestic gods. Nona thinks it's great, and for that reason, she did a good job proposing marriage to Lee John. Upon hearing this, Hugo changes personality. What do you mean propose? Son of a bitch. The goat bear says that then Hugo would be Lee John's father-in-law, and Hugo shoots back. He says he couldn't even get his daughter to say she loved him on Father's Day. He couldn't take it. He uses all his skills. Leon thinks the guy really didn't know how to be moderate. The way he's acting reminds him of someone. His kids shout for him to stop. None of that could beat the hero. Leon, he was weaker. John asks why he's so angry. From what the kids stammer, he thinks he'd be the kind of friend who would go after his daughter. He almost burned down the whole house out of rage. They find it hard to express their feelings toward him, but they cared for him a lot. They brought him coffee and cake. He gets emotional, but John's was for John. He had uploaded the video of the fight, as they told him, and upon seeing his piece of cake, he realizes they gave him the strawberry from the cake to her fiancé, and then Nona receives a warning message of a red-level calamity. It has manifested on the Divine Bridge. All disciples must respond immediately. At sea, near the capital of the Philippines, Manila, the forces of the Leo Divine Squad were already present, giving a rally about how tough this battle could be. But they should not fear. It was a great opportunity to prove their bravery, even though their holy leader was inside a tent. This guy felt those men were simply barbarians. They only tried to hide their lack of skills with speeches, but he didn't care about that. He wondered if his gift had ended up in good hands. The messenger had arrived at Hugo's ruined house. They talk about what had happened, and the box starts to reveal where Gian was. He was forging his new weapons, but they weren't coming out right. The hammer wasn't suitable for what he needed. He lamented not having the hammer that grants achievements. He had no idea where he could recover his weapons, and it was hard to get the materials for the divine artifacts to be throwing them away like that. Then he hears the voice of someone familiar. The goat statue appears. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. He was Sergeyevich. John says yes and calls him Sebastian, but his name was Sergeyevich Vladimir Ivan. Well, now he's Russian. He was the saint of Capricorn, and like him, specialized in production. After Lygin's disappearance, there were no prominent weapons in the world that hadn't passed through his hands. He wanted to apologize for past events and wanted to establish a new cooperative relationship. and the protagonist slams him against the wall. He assumes that if it was about talking about him, whatever he said would surely be garbage. Sergei Vladimir says he was as grumpy as ever. They asked him to leave. It was already time. The news reports that they have come to cover the incursion of the red-level calamity. This calamity that 20 years ago, John had eradicated, but it had returned. It was a red-rank calamity. Many forces from different Divine Squads had gathered to fight her. There was the force from the Leo Divine Squad, but without Steven, the magic specialists, the transformation experts, and the war masters from the Pisces Divine Squad, the Iron Wall, of the Taurus Squad, the battlefield saints of the Aquarius Squad, and the forces of the Capricorn Divine Squad, responsible for producing and strengthening weapons. A multitude of Divine Squads have been deployed for joint strategies. And even the Capricorn Saint had appeared. Jian didn't understand why that old man was on the battlefield, and seeing that old man holding that hammer, he shouted that the object was his. Not only had he stolen his items, but he was also showing them off. He was going to have to beat him up. And in the news, something absolutely massive emerged from the depths of that vast ocean. It was the Calamity. With 1,000 arms, red danger level. All units prepared for battle. And one person was hanging from tentacle. It was none other than the Leo Saint, Stephen Marker, who was fighting alone against the Calamity. But they realized the reason for his fight was because he was crazy about that bone. The old man asked if they were ready to start. The captain saw that guy's intentions. He was just trying to steal the reward. But now he was armed, so he shouted to everyone to take a physical strength position. The Pisces and Aquarius squads gave buffs, and the Taurus squad formed a defensive formation to prevent attacks on the rear. The Leo squad was ready and prepared to attack. Thanks to everyone's skills, and the Leo Divine Squad had given the signal. All the mages had to attack. Stephen challenged them. They couldn't attack until he took out his bone. Meanwhile, Nona was about to take action, cutting the giant octopus's tentacle. Everyone attacked together to claim the reward, but something surfaced. A monstrosity appeared. It was the Mega Crack Bridge of the Week, intense red risk rating. Seeing the Calamity, the old man thought they couldn't do anything against them. He would blow up their explosives, no matter where they were. He will blow up his explosives, no matter where they were. His companions were nearby, but a dagger broke the detonator, and Lime took a bite. It appeared. Jian thinks Sebastian was a piece of trash. The guys at sea were staggering, unable to deal with the swarm of octopuses, but it wasn't too much. Using a bomb to blow up their entire fleet, he would have to reflect on the matter and would give lessons on how to make a raw octopus when it came to Nona. He had used all his energy in his legs earlier, so he didn't have much energy left. There were many small octopuses, but they should handle the boss. Above all, he uses Solar Ear. She had seen her uncle's skills over and over, so she was able to memorize them. Right now, she could replicate his skill, and once close enough to the body, aimed straight at its eyes, but the crack had easily blocked her power with a tentacle. The beast attacks to kill Nona, but the Leo Saint appears to block the attack. She, daydreaming, imagines what her uncle would have done in that situation. She imagines him wielding his sword while flying against his enemy. But she realizes that's what was really happening. Jian launches the attack and uses the Great Mountain Piercing skill, knocking down 1,000 feet with a single strike, the soldiers claim. He only landed the finishing blow on one of the small ones, and the Kraken grabs him and swallows him, but John breaks the Kraken from inside and unleashes his paraphrased lightning attack. At the end of the day, whether there are 10 or 10,000 arms, they're just octopuses. He tore them into cute little pieces, so they had to take care of the rest. Those present idolize Jian. They feel that the old tales weren't exaggerated. He really was the strongest hero of all. New messages appear. People he didn't know were watching him with respect and awe. They were beginning to feel reverence, and the reporter reports that an event that will be talked about for a long time just happened. Reading, John, the returned hero, has single-handedly defeated the Kraken and the 10,000 arms. And in the distance, John hears his niece's voice asking. She was fine and noticed the bone behind her, but anyway, she broke her spear. For that reason, she will make a replacement weapon soon. She can't contain her excitement, and Leo's Saint jumps happily because she was his direct subordinate. And if he's offering her a weapon, that meant he could also make a weapon for him. And since he broke the bone, which cost him a lot of money, the least he could do was reward him with a new weapon. A green explosion burst behind John. This green mist caused the people in Leo's group who inhaled the smoke to lose consciousness and be controlled by Sebastian. John demands to know what he did to Soleim. He shows something interesting by giving a signal, and the men affected by the smoke take care of capturing Nona. John talks about how beautiful it was to see him crushed like that. It was sublime. Stephen asks what he did to his men and why none obeyed his orders. He gave all his men a potion, and thanks to that, the chemical reaction made it so they could only hear his command voice. If he wanted his men to return to normal, they had to listen to him. That was a weapon John himself created. He offers him an offer he can't refuse. He has to kill John. That way his men would return to normal. And they had something in common, an inferiority complex against Lee. John punches the walls watching the hero's skills, and punches the walls watching the crafting skills. But the harder they tried, they realized they couldn't break that wall. From a distance, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He will create the best weapon one could have in the world. By combining their forces, they could overcome it. Leo's Saint grips the sword. Nona yells at him not to do it. She won't forgive him if he hurts her uncle. Stephen, addressing John, thinks it's a unique opportunity, but after throwing the sword, he accuses him. He will never listen to him. He's determined to surpass John, but he doesn't have time to waste on an inferiority complex that won't treat him at the same level of cowardice. The old man couldn't accept that disrespect, attacking. Leo says that 20 years ago he was a ball of inferiority complexes, but he has pushed his limits over and over, failing and failing, all driven by the urge to surpass John. Then John appears beside them, asking how much longer they were going to take. He had let himself be captured to see what Sebastian was planning and to observe Stephen's reaction. But they took too long. He asked him to get out of there. John had a few questions for him. 20 years ago, from Sergei Vladimir's perspective, days before the raid on the Demon Tower, someone informs him that Leo John will die, and he wasn't talking about Hugo's prophecy, but about devising a plan to end him that electrified him. It was his chance of a lifetime, but John breaks the space and time rift, breaking Sebastian's flashback. He didn't care about his past. He agrees and will tell him who he was, but he had to ensure his safety. John thinks he wasn't in a position to ask him for anything if he wasted his time. He would stick out his tongue and knock his jaw out with one punch. Seeing that, he tells him it was Virgo. He wonders if Virgo was really the mastermind behind all that. He had to go see his appraiser to investigate the results of the daggers, and they also had to return his hammer. Sebastian was trembling over losing his hammer, and John asks the three brothers to take care of Sebastian, freeing Leo's subjects, those from the Capricorn divine frame. Seeing that their chosen one was defeated, they activate the plan to kill John themselves, firing a missile at him. He thinks about sending him to hell. But John also wanted to show off his new toy, hitting the bomb with a hammer, turning the bomb into fireworks. Leo's army was ready to take revenge for what had been done to them, so they retreat and run away. He yells at John that he couldn't let them escape, to pass him a balanced, durable, and easy-to-use weapon. John tells him there was one here, catching it by a leg and throwing it at them. Then, in the red zone, outside the Western Protective Dome, in the European Union, was Virgo's search captain. Jane expresses, that place was extremely creepy. His squad was just passing by to see what was happening there. His mission was to search for missing troops from the previous day. It was difficult, and the red fog and atmosphere were very heavy. Everyone heard screams, asking for help. They ran to save them. But as they advanced, the captain felt the screams came from all directions and sounded repetitive, as if they were recorded. He told everyone to stop. But when he turned around, no one from his squad remained. And a branch sinisterly asked him to please help. They were like souls in torment, pushing him in a giant shadow. appeared behind Hugo. Several days had passed since the fight at the bay. John was watching the news that talked about him. His name was everywhere. He received a notification he needed a disciple to activate his divine frame. He also activated his God's eye ability and asked Baya for a Jerry to stare him straight in the eyes. He said he had 85% loyalty with Chingu and 81% with the snake's owner. She wasn't useful, since he needed someone with more loyalty and faith in him. One of the three he had in mind had to be able to transform. He asked where they were, but they had left in the morning. He received a call and a flashback. The redhead activated. Screams were heard. "Run! Save me, I don't want to die. Please, save me." Someone asked him to listen. He had to hide in the car until his father arrived. He could think of it as playing hide and seek. He had to hide so the monster wouldn't find him. Until that moment, he had to be brave. He had to promise to be brave. With a smile on his face, he shouted to Mom and woke up. Nona calmed him down. Hugo also asked him to calm down. After all, he always got very nervous or dreamed. When they were going to see his mother, Nona had an idea. Now that he was awake, she would give him his birthday present. She said she needed a divine artifact that could store Gemini's magical power. So his dad and she bought it for him. She was happy because he was very happy and was always sad on his birthday. Nona told him he had to always be happy and was always sad on his birthday. Nona tells him he had to always be happy so his mother wouldn't feel sad. Hugo says nothing. He just grips the handlebar tighter, angrily. In room 808, Chumchu and Nona is recounting the events of the past few days, about her uncle, the battle, and the various incidents. She was very excited to tell everything, but she would speak more once she woke up. After all, it was her mother. Hugo, with his gaze lowered, stands outside the door, and a shadowy call indicates that today was an important day for him and his family. That's why he wanted to avoid any work dealings. But the countries of the European alliance were looking for him. It was a simple extermination of a disaster. He asks if Virgo wasn't nearby. He was the strongest, but they wouldn't call him unless it was an emergency. Virgo had already refused any combat with that calamity. In fact, it was one of the most dangerous calamities. He had already encountered it in the past. It was the one that 10 years ago destroyed the Blood Frog Airport in the national jurisdiction of the EU, Virgo, Belgium. John was talking to Sunjay about whether he wanted to be his disciple, but he couldn't believe that deal was going to be difficult. He apologized. He thinks maybe he didn't know his nephew well. They hadn't even told him it was his birthday. It seemed like they were hiding something. Something must have happened on his birthday. And just then, appraiser Kim Jong arrives. He had used a portal to get to Virgo City. He asked why it was called Virgo City. First of all, he explains that Europe was always culturally influenced by religion after the appearance of the saints, and the system of guilds took root in the world. Europe became a huge theocracy, and you could see on every dome who protected them, everywhere, their faith had to be very strong. But they were going to get to the point. He created a soundproof barrier and shows the information of the dagger that stabbed him 20 years ago. He managed to capture some memories that remained in it, and after investigating the memory fragments, the culprit who stabbed him was Kevin, the Saint of Virgo. At Hugo's house, he asked the fairy, Larry Queen, to investigate why Sunjay rejected his offer to join his ranks. That remained in her, and after investigating the memory fragments, the culprit who stabbed him was Kevin, the Saint of Virgo. At Hugo's house, he asked the fairy, Larry Queen, to investigate why Sunjay rejected his offer to join his frame. He had to figure something out. He was still in Gemini, and he had already lost all faith. After a few minutes, Sunjay came to ask him for a favor. He was in luck. He could extract the information. In exchange for that favor, he asked her to open the teleportation portal to Gemini's secret library. We are told that the Gemini library was a place where forbidden books existed that only the higher saints could read. Last time he threw away his badge, yes, because it was very difficult to get in. He needed to find out something extremely important to him. She agrees, but he had to tell her all his intentions without lying. What he wanted to find was the spirit summoning ability to allow summoning beings from other worlds. The scene changes. John is at a train station, thinking about the dagger's declaration. But he knows there was a powerful evil being involved, strong enough to harm not only a saint, but a divine god. It could already be a Lois. But he couldn't attack the gods. He was convinced that the idiot who stabbed him was deeply connected to the disasters of the unknown civilization. He needed to regain his strength as soon as possible to face him. And finally, the elite troops of St. Hugo Otters arrive. Now they are inside the disaster area, burning and getting rid of the minor calamities. They ask what those branches were that made walking difficult. John thinks it was a coincidence. He didn't expect them to be negotiating with Virgo. What brought them there? They had come at Sagittarius's request. They received a commission to take care of the disasters, and St. Hugo went to meet with the European government to give a detailed explanation of what they were going to do. He had accepted the job because these were special circumstances the monster wanted. The powers of all the saints. They asked if he had ever heard about the blood fog monster at the European Fiscal Department's political headquarters. They explained the situation to Hugo. The calamity had appeared 10 days ago. Virgo had moved, but his forces were reduced to 0. Moreover, Lord Virgo was dealing with a similar rank at sea. That's why they were seeking help from other divine squads, and he and his friend were the best for the job, and there were no other people available. Hugo thinks it was an obvious trick. The Virgo saint knew they would accept. They just had to name the calamity. Blood mist, and he would never say no to that job. As for John, they tell him that the wife of his chosen one died because of the red mist. She tried to protect her son, but she and her first disciple, the captain of the divine squad Li Gwen, died. John knew that guy. He was the one who helped them carry things 20 years ago. Now he understood why he avoided talking about his wife's matter. He never thought something like that could have happened. Honestly speaking, the Hugo he knew wasn't like that. He knew how good he was since he taught him how to fight when he was at his best. He trusted his back without hesitation. That Hugo from the past was one of the strongest among the 12 saints. They ask him to tell all the details that happened to Hugo. They agree, but it wasn't easy to talk about it. But since it was him, they're going to tell him. That horrible incident happened 10 years ago on Sunji's 7th birthday. In the past, the redhead and his mother Chun Hai Woong, a Sagittarius member on duty, were at the airport, and Li Jae-won, the first disciple of Sagittarius, was also there. Sunjae asks for some food, so Li Jae-won goes to buy it. While waiting, he hears two brothers arguing about a mistake they had made, but they run away because they didn't want to die. The mother is about to tell them to leave, but a huge shadow appears before their eyes. Everything goes dark at the airport, and a red mist starts to rise from the ground. The mother grabs her son and tells Haiwon that what was happening was really bad. The first disciple drops the bags of food to the ground. They turn off at the airport, and a red fog begins to appear from the ground. The mother takes her son and tells Haiwon that what was happening was really bad. The first disciple throws the bags of food to the ground, and the calamity lunges without hesitation to devour the mother and her son. But a shove saves their lives. Wang Lija had given her life to save them. And even on her deathbed, she gives a thumbs up and smiles as a sign that everything was going to be okay. Seeing what happened, the mother runs to save her son. The scene was cruel. Many were dead, others injured, crying out for help, and the mother telling her son to hide until his father came. Until then, he should wait bravely. She asked his father to promise her, and a vine wraps around her and captures her. In Hamlei's mind, he only thought about telling her a bunch of stories. He cried, begging for forgiveness, and branches approach to trap him as well. And a flash of fire appears on the scene. It was Hugo asking if he was okay. He was fine, but his mother was not. He understood. He managed to spot his wife and calm down. There still might be a way to save her. He tries to pull her out, but the souls of his friend and wife appear asking for help. That left him frozen. He lost all sense of reality, and a branch pierced his ribs. The calamity smiled and sucked his celestial power, but the saints entered the scene. They were there to help. The three attacked with their best powers. But the calamity had the ability to swallow magic. Because of that, it could regenerate. The calamity attacks Its attack was devastating. It could even break the barrier. They were in trouble. But one of the 5 chosen appears using branches of the Golden Rule, the Saint of Gemini. She asks them to use teleportation. That calamity was too strong, and even the 4 together couldn't defeat it. They had to send it somewhere else. Hugo shouts that they couldn't do that. The souls of all the people present couldn't be saved, and he could also fight. She was reaching her limit. The barrier wouldn't last much longer. She demands that he cast the spell. There was no more time. She agrees. Hugo desperately shouts not to do it. That day, all the media and all the people criticized Hugo. They only praised the other saints, but on the other hand, Sagittarius, who had been protecting Korea, was criticized by the citizens. It wasn't just that he didn't stop the disaster, but that there were more victims. Because of Hugo's actions, rumors spread that he preferred to save his family over others. He was too selfish. Hugo publicly apologized, but his country did not accept it. They came out to harshly criticize him. Over and over, they shouted all kinds of insults at him. His relatives had died because of him. They were gathered in these pictures, and it is told that the calamity had absorbed half of Hugo's strength. People continued criticizing him on the way to the hospital. His subordinates told him he didn't have to take all the blame. He alone also fought and lost a lot after the disaster. He couldn't stay silent. He had to tell what really happened. He had to explain that if they hadn't teleported the calamity, they could have saved the souls. He responds that if there's a way to save them, they wouldn't have died. They only took their souls. They just had to capture the red mist and recover the souls, but at that moment he was weak. They even took half of his powers. No one present could have defeated him. They shout that if he left things like that, they would hate him forever. He replies that it was okay to blame him. He couldn't keep the promise he made to John to protect Korea. He can't say anything. It didn't matter what the criticisms were or how much they hated him. He knows it was all frustrating, but he needs to endure all of it. He thanks them for their concern. Captain Calm explains that Hugo had taken the affected to the hospital because he still had faith they would wake up. When Hugo goes to open the door, his son is heard apologizing to his mother for their staying longer at the airport because of him. Because of him, she and her uncle were in that state. He apologizes over and over. Hugo, for the first time, breaks down. Tears run down his cheeks. Now he was telling what happened. At that moment, he should have told his son it wasn't his fault. But he couldn't show that he was broken too. He thinks Sunjai still believes he was to blame. John asked the captain to let him cry when he spoke. It was annoying anyway. Cry when he spoke? It was annoying either way. Now that the blood fog has reappeared, they need to settle old debts. This time, the frog will destroy it completely. She says the powers left by the sun god came on their own. Now it's going to swallow the entire city in them. Hugo complains that they had to burn all the calamities. His subjects behaved very friendly and gave him many gifts. But it was clearly because he had talked about his story. Jian hears Rena's voice. She informs him that she just spoke with Yun-jae and will tell him what happened from the redhead's perspective. What he wanted to find was the spiritual call. The spiritual call is an ability that can summon beings from other worlds to appear. That's why he wanted to save his mother and uncle. He wanted to recover all the people who, because of him, had sacrificed themselves in the library. He was going to donate the bracelet so the book would give him the knowledge. He was looking for the page to find the spell, but the blonde appears again. He won't let him talk to the dead. It was John Sigwa who says he only thought he was important because he had John on his side, but at that moment he was alone and should watch his father and uncle. They were desperate, showing a vision of the scene. Hugo was signaling today's retreat. The captain notifies Group 1 and Group 2, but Group 3 did not respond. And a "help me, please" is heard. John asked him to calm down. Now he was too agitated. He had to stay calm. For the battle, he'll take revenge after 10 long years, and branch-like loops shoot out from the ground. The frog attacks, but John manages to stop it and asks if he was the one who affected his nephew and friend. He immediately realizes that calamity was dangerous. John thinks he has very big dreams regenerating his leg. It seems he intended to devour both humans and cities. But they were there to ruin the meal. Today they would tear open his stomach from side to side. Hugo shouts that the series of attacks was working. Everyone had to prepare the second wave of arrows. They had arrows made from banana. The frog tries to attack those shooting the arrows, but they dodge. John thinks the roots were annoying. He asks Slime for scissors. He's going to do some pruning. That really hurts the frog. In fact, it tears it apart and kills it completely. They think they couldn't see how strong John was. The redhead shouts that they had won, but John still believes it was a tough situation, but that calamity could consume all the powers around it, giving itself the order to regenerate. The frog regenerated like a titan from Shingeki, and they realized that the dome, which was in the city, was surrounded by a blood fog. John realizes that the frog had penetrated the dome with its roots underground. The general orders to raise the bows again. While Gamabunta, the blonde, mocks, now the frog could devour the entire city. What was once a refuge for people was now a magic reservoir for the blood fog. There were many more people than at the airport. He couldn't wait to see the show that would unfold. The redhead can't believe it. He remembers the two brothers talking in the past and realizes that one of the brothers was John, and Wah, the blonde, laughs at how it took so long to figure it out. He says his father was an idiot. He didn't realize it was all a trap by his mother to take away his credibility. He accuses him that many people were killed that day. He didn't feel an ounce of guilt, but he responds that they simply had bad luck. The redhead attacks. John Wayne thinks he's going to bring his uncle again, scaring him, but it was the same strategy with differences. Now, he appears himself, delivering a full power blow, stunning him. He pulls the relic from his hand. He revived Gamabunta with that artifact. He should be able to use it to eliminate him. Because of that, he teleports. Meanwhile, elite forces open fire. Thousands of arrows. The frog defends itself, and John uses the pruning skill. He gets overconfident. Due to his incredible cut, an arm is severed from his body. Hugo appears to defend him. John unleashes his power with one strike, but it does nothing to him. Thanks to the divine red eye ability, 20 years ago in the Devil's Tower, we are told that those calamities with that power were incredibly stronger than the red-level calamities. They were almost impossible to attack. They came from hell itself. Jian activates his skill to see the enemy's weaknesses and realizes there were 3 cores, but the most dangerous core was invisible. It was the one giving power based on souls. They realized they were using the dome as a power source. He orders his forces to destroy the city's dome, but the calamity won't let them. It traps them and takes their souls. Once again, restless souls begin to scream that they will be saved, causing shock among those present. John thinks he knew how to anger his opponents, and a portal inside the dome appears. It was the redhead. He notices a blood tree right before his eyes. It was a tree exhaling red mist. It was all the fault of that tree activating its magical power. On television, they show the events. The bloody mist that had appeared 10 years ago was once again taking many lives. It was also impossible for rescue teams to enter. The number of casualties could not be estimated with this event. No one could do anything. No divine cadre could face that monstrosity. But one person is seen. They don't report who it is because a branch breaks the drone. Jian could only dodge the branches, and Hugo is hit. His divine relic is destroyed, and he is slammed to the ground. Jian thinks about helping him, but restless souls ask for help again, distracting him. He thinks that trick was definitely dirty. The calamity grabs him and drags him through the building, sending him underground with its power. Looking at the archers, it tells them all that they are next. But a pain is inflicted on him. Someone was hurting him. On his ship, the redhead delivers his best blows. Because of that, innocent people, his uncle and his mother, were in a coma. The calamity, feeling threatened, leaps to save its core. But Hugo calls for his ship and activates his plan B. An arrow the size of a pillar pierces the beast. He activated his relic. Arrow arsenal of the white soldiers. He thought one arrow wouldn't be enough. So he carefully prepared the others and shoots arrows to pin its body to the ground. His archers throw ropes to immobilize it, but they couldn't withstand the great power the calamity had. They know they can't defeat it, but they can stop it. From Yang Wei's side, he attacks with rage and teary eyes. He manages to break the tree and the city's barrier. A blood mist laments for his city. Its source of power had been shattered. The souls that were bound to the tree trunk were disappearing. Young Wei was awakening. He had fainted, but the tree was already broken. That made him very happy. Now he could see the sky. He did it. But a roar of fire sounds in the distance. The city had melted. The subjects didn't know what had happened. A great explosion had appeared and their saint had protected them. The calamity was using the power of Sagittarius that it took from him. 10 years ago, it stares fixedly at the one who broke its tree. Then, it couldn't believe its son was on that stage. It realizes he had broken the dome. The calamity will definitely chew him up and eat him alive. The calamity would finish taking away the other half of its power. Hugo resists, but an evil aura of unknown origin is trapping him. He locks John Wayne in a capsule to protect him. Gamabunta laughs. It finally swallowed all the power of the sun god, and a sword rises from the ground. The calamity feels ready to face it. Now it has all the remaining power of the sun god, but John shouts that it's not over yet. From Hugo's perspective, he feels his whole body numb. In the end, he achieved nothing. He couldn't save his wife. Neither his friend nor his son could take revenge on the damn red fog. He thought that was the end, but he caught a glimpse of a light. He saw the fragment of power that had been taken from him earlier. His power was right before his eyes, but he couldn't do anything about it. His memory was becoming blurry. He wondered what he was even fighting for. And a memory of his family appeared. It was a scene from a photo they had taken. Everyone had looked so good that day. He opened his eyes. He wasn't going to collapse like that. He wouldn't end up shaming his family. He couldn't give up. He had to catch up. He kept telling himself over and over. He had to catch up. His body wouldn't hold out much longer. A shadow of light appeared. It was Jian shouting his name. He still had a lot of work to do. He had to take his hand. 30 years ago in Arabia, Hugo was running. A calamity that ended up devouring him. He thought that was the end. He regretted that he never even got married, but someone appeared to save him. His friend was always like that. Whenever he was in danger, they would see his help. Jean Wei asked his father to wake up John. He analyzes him and realizes that his friend's power is fully restored. He advises him not to worry about his father. He would be more than fine and goes on the attack. Against the calamity, he's going to take care of it. He blames him because his friend was despised by everyone and his nephew never celebrated his birthday. All he had to do was break its core. The calamity was in trouble. It had to return to the underworld. It could die, but it still had enough strength to finish off the son and the father. It was its defeat, but it would keep its power again. Jian shouts that he was confused. Hugo might be an idiot, but he was an extremely powerful being. Reporters in the distance wondered what was happening. A powerful column of fire rose from the ruins. In an instant, it was midnight. But everything was illuminated. Nona was watching what happened in Jaylee. Says, it's been a long road, but your father has regained all his power. The calamity screamed. It had to take back its power. Hugo uses celestial radiance. That ability burned away all impurities. John wanted to take his own life, but he wouldn't be the one to do it. He switches places with Hugo, and with a smile on his face, he tells him to finish him off. Hugo remembers everything that happened. His son crying, feeling guilty over his mother's death. But he tells him no, it wasn't his fault. After the explosion, John thinks it caused too much destruction, but now they truly destroyed all the cores and the bodies were reduced to ashes. They couldn't do anything more. Hugo thanks John. He replies that the boy he knows would never thank him. But for today, he'll accept it. And by the way, he found something wild. Fighting that thing, he found the soul core. He believes that was the thing holding the souls. He uses the snake ability and breaks the spiritual seal. He was releasing the souls that thing had devoured. Now, the people who had been consumed could awaken. One by one, Yang Wei asks if it's really possible. John answers, when those souls return to their respective bodies, they will awaken. Your mother will too. He heard that her birthday was recently. It's a bit late, but happy birthday. From Steven's perspective, Marker is defeating the Kraken with his super bone. He feeds it and takes it for a walk. He goes on adventures, but then returns to reality and wakes up. He asks, all his minions to attack Jian and Capricorn, but they have to bring his super bone. They get angry. They couldn't believe he was still obsessed with the bone. They were going to put him to sleep again, and someone shouts, "It was a miracle." The people who had been asleep due to the red fog for 10 years were waking up. Everyone was regaining consciousness. On the news, they comment on the event. They were receiving reports that thousands of people were waking up. They were on the outskirts of the Western Protection Dome, and after a tough battle, the hero chose. The strength of Sagittarius has defeated the blood mist. They couldn't describe what happened. Such an event was unprecedented nowadays. They hoped that those who hadn't awakened yet would do so soon. The older blonde man watches the news. Not only had he lost to the blood mist, he also lost the rosary. He caused a huge mess. It was understandable that he was defeated, but he couldn't be beaten by such a weak guy. Now they would be exposed to people's gossip. They had to erase any trace of them. They had to go to the hospital to capture Yang. Wei and Hugo tell them that his wife was still asleep, but she was expected to wake up soon. Jian asked the redhead to go to his mother. Yang Wei asked his father if he was going too. Hugo starts crying because his son was worried about him. Hugo gives a very long speech, but he couldn't go since he had things to do. The redhead agrees and leaves. At the hospital, he thinks he will finally see his mother, but first he has to buy flowers. He couldn't arrive empty-handed. The older blonde man wonders where that brat could be, and how a hospital could keep trash better than for 10 years. In the European Union, they were interviewing the Archer forces, and John was at a bar, analyzing another piece of dagger from the unknown civilization. This one was in a coarse shell. All evidence pointed to Virgo being responsible. It wasn't very clear, but the answers would definitely come alight. He tells Hugo that now they will capture Virgo, but he asks them to rest a bit. Not everyone was as resilient as him. Jean expresses, "They're so weak nowadays. In my days, they didn't even have the chance to breathe. Before they attacked me, he asked why he didn't follow his son, and Hugo didn't believe he was capable of facing his wife and friend, and he still had a lot of work to do. They had problems with Virgo and problems with Libra. They had to find the culprit who caused all of this. He tells the forces they can return to Korea now. They weren't needed. They were too much trouble. Everyone had to return except that guy. They had only sent Sun Jae. He was definitely surrounded by guys who were going to be looking for him." Hugo panics, but Jian calms him down. He had given him a coin that would come in handy soon. It was a birthday gift. John Wayne walking sees the families. He was very happy, and beside him, someone had activated their powers and attacked him. He tries to defend himself with his shield. He asks them to hold back their powers. They were in a hospital. He expresses that he had improved a lot. He could stop an A-level attack, but he is attacked again. An entire floor of the building collapses. Meanwhile, in Virgo's office, the Virgo saint himself arrives demanding to see Kevin Hazard. He was humanity's strongest prosecutor, a Crescent Moon agent, an icy silver knight, the commander of the Corps in the freezing cold. His Virgo cluster was admirable. He was rumored to have an unparalleled power scale. The only flaw of Kevin Hazard was his huge ego. He wanted an explanation of what had happened in his city. John was all over the news. That must be him. He was like that because he had never beaten John in a competition. John was always the one who landed the final blow. He appeared in interviews. He even beat him at karaoke. I think the one there is a friend. He's amazing. This time he's going to take him down with his own hands. The office worker orders them to enter the bar because he had already arrived. Everyone shouts not to move, but a blast of music stuns them. It was Hugo and his forces singing along to the music. The Virgo general yells at them that they are a disgrace to the divine ranks, and John punches him. They had to shut up. They were ruining the show. She argues that they were following the office workers' orders, but this cloaked guy appears. He says he has little time, apologizes for his subordinates' actions, but he needs their help. He was the head of the Virgo sanctuary. He asked her to please get rid of Kevin Hazard, the saint of their own divine cluster. As for Kevin, he was searching for religion with his ability, but his mind wandered. He realizes something and breaks the office worker's glasses. He was the one responsible for his distracted mind. He was wasting his time. He was the reason her mind wandered. He was wasting her time. It was a scorpion skill. He asks once again where Ollie was. John, based on his answer, will see if his body is saved or not in a Virgo sanctuary. John was completely destroying him. The sanctuary chief thought that was the best option. His Virgo group, at that moment, was split in two. It was complete tyranny and needed help to overthrow him. As a reward, he's going to give him the piercing consecration. That was the master weapon John used 20 years ago. All the subjects inside the Virgo sanctuary had fallen. And the sanctuary door opens. A voice is heard. It was Kevin Hazard, the Virgo saint, who expresses that he's glad to see someone so strong. John thought the same. 20 years had passed. He never thought waiting at the top would be so pleasant. Hugo was there, and the bastard who had betrayed him. It was satisfying to sweep them away all at once, they asked. Who had made their vassal god look like that? That was another reason to take him down. But Hugo breaks the attack and says he will have to fight him first. Since John was still intoxicated, Hugo thinks he has succeeded. John makes a call. He is in front of Kevin's sacred relics of the sanctuary, and they were about to have a fight. And John asked them to get out of the way. He was about to give him what he wanted. He is glad, finally steps forward and asks his allies not to interfere. It was an adults-only battle, but he is still surprised. Because he was losing his touch, Hazard had stopped his attack, and a chill ran through his blood. The relic was unable to withstand the cold. As a consequence, it breaks. He dodges his attacks and pulls out his hammer, deflecting the attack. He kicks him. After that, they had to get serious. John expresses that he hadn't seen that sword in a long time. It was the binary relic Winterfrost. He tells John how he was going to move now. Winterfrost had frozen all his limbs without him realizing it. He had let his guard down. He was much weaker than 20 years ago. Attacking him, he had nowhere to escape, but John switches bodies. And the traitor is pierced by the saint's sword. John had been annoyed by his nonsense. So he hits him with a hammer for a home run. When he strikes, a wall collapses. It was the heavenly punishment. He thought it was over. Hugo, paraphrasing, was contradictory. The man who betrayed John in the Demon Tower was betrayed by one of his own subordinates, but he hadn't betrayed anyone. Hugo yells at him not to lie. He had stabbed John in the Demon Tower and set a trap, but he replies to stop the nonsense, to shut up. He couldn't blame him for something like that. Shooting his sword, but the sanctuary chief stops him and ties his arm. It was an absolute order. With Libra's ability, since he had reached that point, he would have to get rid of everyone. He uses Libra's ability and swaps bodies with the Virgo saint. But Kevin uses his skill, and he cuts off his arm to free himself. He laughs. The expression he had before cutting his arm was unique, all to avoid becoming a tribute to the sacred spirit. But that was enough. His arm was also very valuable. Everyone tries to stop him, but it was already too late. They were all welcomed into the unknown space. John had already experienced that feeling of dark and unpleasant energy. The sanctuary chief explains that this was the view of hell. In that place, they would dig their graves. The allies tried to avenge their saint, but they can't use their abilities, their saints, and everyone present has lost connection with their zodiac saint. That space was a place of power isolation. From Libra, they couldn't use saint powers in that place. John tries to approach, but arms from the ground grab him. Those arms are not just arms. The scream he doesn't remember was the things he had fought for 20 years. The ones that brought him to the brink of death. John was right. They were not like the red mist that was forcibly summoned. They were true disasters that were in the Demon Tower. At the hospital, Yang Wei was getting beaten up. That was the difference between an S-class and an A-class, no matter what they did. He will never be able to do anything against him. The redhead sees that it was his mother's piece, strikes him, and sends him and his mother outside the building with a single attack. As he and his mother fall freely, he remembers that no one can help him, neither his sister nor his father. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't do anything. He had no mana left. He was very weak, but he had to react. He was the only one who could do something. Holding his mother, his uncle and father never gave up. He won't either. He will protect her even if it costs him his life, and Ophiuchus welcomes his indomitable spirit. He asks if he wants his power. He accepts and will do whatever it takes to save his mother. The Ruby is surprised to see he still had a little mana left. And from Jahan and the others, all were trapped by the hands. He had planned that plan for a long time, and it was finally working. To think, he worked so hard for some cockroaches without level. It was a shame he couldn't use his skills. John thinks he talked too much. He would never give up in a situation like that. Even when he fought while they destroyed his body, he never thought of giving up. Even when he wandered the demon tower alone for 20 years, he never thought of giving up. He was a pitiful madman who didn't get confused. That wasn't even close to a disaster. He thinks he was just bragging and attacks him with dozens of arms from Yang. Wei delivers a powerful blow to the blonde. He told him to surrender. But he would never surrender. He couldn't. His mother and uncle were in his care. Now it was his turn to defend them. He will protect them with his own hands. A notification appears to the Legion. You have passed the trial. The first disciple has been born. The first saint of Ophiuchus has been born. That makes him use a skill from God's Bible, which lets him write verses of his own story. His enormous power breaks the barrier of hell. He would like to take care of it himself, but first he had to go for his weapon. He breaks all the chains with brute force alone. That feeling he will never forget, even after 20 years. She was heavenly punishment. Double rank that, the 8th artifact and her masterpiece. He proclaims that his weapon has not eaten for 20 years. So I had to feed her. Now I wanted to hear him speak. He hadn't said that even insects writhed when stepped on. He was different for never giving up. But what if he gave up? Or would he fight like a man? He asked his saint to stop them. But Jian defends himself. He was happy. It had been a long time since he fought. With his wonderful weapon, thanks to breaking the hell barrier, the powers returned. July meteor, celestial splendor, the forces of Virgo and Sagittarius were back in the battle, but Jeff yells at them that pose sucked. He couldn't believe they got away with it. He had to get out of that place, but the saint of Virgo seeks revenge for his right arm, but something strange comes out to defend him. A sinister voice appears. It was Jean Louis Maureen. He had some urgent matters. He will give his traitor as tribute by creating a many-armed beast. John thinks he felt very powerful, so he uses his skill with his recovered sword. The perspective of the taser is shown and observes a gigantic explosion in the rubble mound. They think he could only use 85% of his strength. He doesn't know how much more he must push to use 100. The Saint of Virgo thought he was a crazy bastard. He had completely destroyed his sanctuary in a temple. Jean Louis explains that his mission had failed. He only did the best he could. The Saint of Libra throws him to the ground with a spell. She hopes that next time he succeeds in such a simple mission. Meanwhile, Kevin tells them that Scorpio was the one who stabbed him, but Hugo couldn't believe his words. Hallie couldn't be. They had checked all the records of the daggers of the unknown civilization. He thinks the dagger they mention is familiar to him. He investigated and then found it. He found those 5 objects while researching Scorpio. Each was linked to an unknown civilization. He says the beings of Scorpio were dangerous. They were close to beings that threatened humanity. Nohan appears expressing that he doesn't believe that is true. They had said that was from Scorpio, but he was at the Scorpion Sanctuary before coming here, jail. He helped him in many ways. He seemed like a good person, but it was too soon to draw those conclusions. Kevin shouts in amazement and asks what kind of place the Scorpion Sanctuary was. And John's stomach growls, so they'll go eat something first. John was getting angry. He couldn't control his strength. Kevin scolds him, asking how he could behave like a child. He also scolds Hugo, wondering how he could have raised his children like that. The protagonist realizes he had become much stronger thanks to the fight. Hugo looks happy about his revenge, and he also touches him the same way. Nona hands him something that Jael had given her. It was one of the 8 relics. He remembers that she used to run away every time she saw him. He wonders why she had that. He thought she hated him. That weapon was connected to the unknown civilization. Hazard claims he was right. Scorpion was related to the unknown civilization. Also, she saw him as a target in ancient times and poisoned his food. Scorpion must have been the one behind that. The appraiser wanted to see that bottle. Hugo says to hand it over. Hazard thinks they were very rude for distrusting him. The appraiser believes what happened during the Inquisition was shameful. They had conspired with another saint and were manipulated, not to mention they took control of the tower. They even manipulated the Giona troops. He shares the information they obtained. They made them suspect Virgo. They were so thorough. All the clues pointed to Virgo. They were so obvious that the answer was questionable. He didn't know if the one who stabbed him had white hair, since he only had memories of the dagger. But since that wasn't the case, he had to rule out the other suspects. Libra, Cancer, and Scorpion. Now he was sure Kevin wasn't the one who stabbed him. He loved seeking attention, but he couldn't do something like that. He's thinking about visiting Scorpion. He was sure she was involved in this. He's also curious about the gift she sent him. Besides, he made Sunjay a saint, but it will take time before he sees him again. Hugo asks what he just said. He confirms that Sunjay was his first saint. Nona, behind him, scolds him for why she wasn't the chosen one, but then she thinks. He just had to tell his brother to give up his position and hand it over. As for the redhead, he had finally defeated him. A doctor thought it was incredible. Thanks to him, Taiwo was easily taken down. He was the director of Gemini. He accused him of not being allowed to steal that grimoire. Just like that, there are things in this world he couldn't understand. He said he could take it since he no longer needed it, but they couldn't let things go like that. He had many questions. Besides, he had betrayed Gemini. He had to go with them, and someone better than also overheard those words. Sunjay thought he was acting like that again, not considering others' perspectives and forcing only what he wanted. They wouldn't tolerate his attitude anymore. They tried to perform a summoning to strip Sunjay of his power, but something was happening. It was too much energy. And because of that, they summoned their strongest summon, Hellion. The first fairy king, the king, said they had summoned him, but the boy's aura was what brought him to that place. Seeing the boy's immense power, he thought about switching religions, but that couldn't be possible. He was the fairy king, an authority of Gemini. But he thought he had lost connection with Gemini's Holy Spirit. And he didn't even know where they had gone. It didn't seem enough to swear loyalty. They gave up and thought about attacking Sunjay themselves. He used his skills, ready to fight, but he had run out of snake energy because the fairies had devoured all his power. He asked him to do something to defend him, but he had no life contract. They still didn't have a bond. The director laughed at his victory, but the wall collapsed. The director only caught a shadow approaching him and was struck by a heavy blow. The guy shouted, "Who dares threaten our beloved Sunjay?" It was High One, the ancient leader of Sagittarius Divine Squad, but they were only two. They were nothing against their forces, who outnumbered them. But with an epic entrance, the forces of Sagittarius made their appearance. They had to surrender before they got a hole in their head. A portal opens, and they are told to retreat immediately. The grimoire's plan had failed, and before their eyes, Sunjay had the one who had sacrificed his life for him. A lot of time had passed before she reached his waist, and now she was eye level. He didn't know where to start, but he was very happy that she was awake. The fairy king notices the book, and an angry voice is heard. "Don't play dumb." He knew Uncle John had become a saint, and Uncle appears to tell him he was there. The fairy king expresses that he was even more nervous than when he was surrounded by Gemini's force. He asks him to escape and transfer him to his divine frame. And he jumps off the building to escape from Nona. She had let him be born first. So now he couldn't give up being the saint. When he lands on the ground, Nona is heard saying, "Sunjay, kids, how have you been?" It was his mother. Then, at the teleportation transit station, were John Kevin, a Gemini captain, and Hugo, who was crying. They had informed him that his wife had woken up. She hadn't fully recovered, but she was in good health. They also told him that they had expelled the Sagittarius force and Taewoo had disappeared. They had found the culprits from 10 years ago. They were Yo Taewoo and John Saiwo, the two saints of the Libra children. The captain explains that in the past Hugo had deciphered all of that. He accused him if his kids had been responsible for the incident. She only believed that he couldn't do anything with his half-saint level. She would talk to her children and punish them for what happened, but he was the one to blame for not preventing that disaster. In any case, he was the one who couldn't save Korea. He had two options: reveal the truth, defeat the calamity, save his wife and the citizens of Korea. But if he told everyone what happened and didn't defeat the calamity, she would take care of his children. If you remember correctly, the names were Nona and Sun Hai. He had to choose. For that reason, Hugo couldn't do anything in the past. He was the most affected by the events. Jean asks him to do whatever is necessary to find those brothers. We are told that the real reason Sun Hai and Nona were in other divine squads was to ensure their safety, and now that he thinks about it, his disciple must have some mission, and John needed an adult. To complete some tasks, he asks Hugo if he wanted to go pray at his altar and become an adult. The Sagittarius Saint gets angry. He couldn't touch his contractor. Kevin asks John if he didn't want to join his divine squad, since his was a complete mess. The captain explains that he tried to convince Nona to join his divine squad. It was their destiny to be together, but she completely ignores him. Nona also tells them that if they were going to Scorpio, it was very difficult to take the usual routes. The sea and air routes were blocked by the unknown civilization. That's why the right route was through Leo. When she finished her negotiations, she would come see them. She tells the two that she saw how they fought against Blood Fog. Both had been great. John thinks he raised his children well, and Hugo says that no matter how hard it was, the happy faces of his children were priceless, and his captain looked strange. Did he have dark feelings against his daughter? Why wasn't he responding ha-ha? And in the end, they all end up fighting. Kevin was also going to prove his innocence, and by the time they defeated everyone, go out to save them and fill himself with glory. They were ready to go to the coordinates of Washington, D.C., United States. At a table, several people from the Leo squad were gathered. They thought they should give a good welcome to their guests who were coming to visit. Welcome to the Battle Arena, the Festival EA. Now I know English. A few hours ago in Washington, D.C., they were admiring a statue that was clearly gigantic, and Kevin wanted the same one. He should build one just like it for himself. And a group of people asked them to please follow them. Jean tells them to get lost. He wasn't there for them, but they asked him to calm down. They came to deliver him an invitation to a legendary battle. This event was one of a kind. It was simply to select the strongest. They wanted to produce a unique fight between him and his saint. As for Stephen, they tell him that they had prepared a match for him against Lee John. He had recently lost to him in an unfair attack, but everyone knows that 30 years ago, he had won. Luckily, they had just confirmed that Lee John had accepted. The Leo Saint couldn't believe it. Gene Cameron's, before the event, the captain tells him that the event was a success. The Coliseum was full, and the broadcast was breaking viewership records. Stephen sees the stage and goes to the bathroom, where he finds the protagonist. He tells him to stay calm. A dead man wasn't going to do anything to him. Stephen tells his story. 20 years ago, his death was very hard for him. Back then, he was the symbol of humanity, and humanity was plunged into sadness the day he died. It could be difficult, but he also, without that sadness, nurtured the option to take over his name and proclaim himself the strongest man. It was to maintain order. He managed to make humanity believe something and not fall apart. But John thinks he had strayed from the topic. He says that arena was just entertainment. There was no need to fight. It was simply a show. So he wouldn't prefer a draw in the arena. The announcer says, ladies and gentlemen, today, we will witness a legendary battle. Who will be the winner of the tournament? Stephen stays calm. Lee John had promised to cooperate. John had changed the rules. They had proposed to face off against all the fighters. Stephen thinks that was the protagonist's plan, to say he couldn't beat them because he was against so many people, and thus turn the fight into a star-studded exhibition. With that approach, everyone could be winners. And the announcer continues. He will show the video of the confrontation between John and Stephen Marker from 30 years ago. Stephen didn't want that video shown. The protagonist asks if he's angry and tells him to tell everyone he used a video program. The Leo Saint yells that he only paid $50 billion to use it, and with that, the battle begins. Everyone turns against the protagonist. Hugo is baffled by what he had paid, and Kevin couldn't stand seeing them fight like that. He would join the battle too. Hugo and the captain had to stop Leo's people. They thought their allies couldn't interfere in the fight, and those present, as they had bet, couldn't let Leo's group enter the fight due to an unexpected situation. The entire arena crowd jumped up to start brawling at the streaming signal. Everyone was dying of laughter. In the VIP area, they had to stop things. And director Oliver, who had orchestrated that event, meets Nona. She says she had never used honorifics with her before. She asks who she really was, both in the battle royale. George tells Stephen to show off by throwing punches wildly. And now it was his turn. Leo Saint puts aside his cowardice and activates his power. He attacks with all his strength, and John lands a punch on his face. And another, and another, and another, and another, and another. Stephen thinks they're going to kill him, but Kevin appears. So they would fight him too, and an explosion is heard. It was Nona. She asked him to reveal his true identity, and it was Sylvia, one of the 10 chosen by Pisces. Those present are shocked to see that Oliver was a woman. Kevin thinks they were stealing his spotlight moment. And next to him was a person with a sword pierced through them. He says it wasn't what they were thinking. He didn't want to do it, and a voice says it was strange. How the hell he knew it was him? He had a good eye. Jean recognizes that arrogant voice. It was Libra. She thinks it was to be expected from the owner of the divine frame, who competed with her. That was incredible. Kevin says their hidden motives were obvious. He asked Jeon how he survived that tower. He didn't expect to see his face again. Seeing his face, he admits he was strong. He asks Kevin why he hadn't safely pierced John's heart. He couldn't give excuses. Everyone knew that. He had done it. The crab, the fish, and the goat knew it, but it ignited. Hugo expresses that he shouldn't have been fooled by his words. He is disappointed in himself. His strength was supposed to have already recovered, but he was unable to burn that body and believes that Kevin's sword must be sharper if he wanted to hurt him. Just like when he stabbed John 20 years ago, Kevin didn't understand why he couldn't pierce a guy who was nothing more than a puppet. It must be because of the mark of God. That was a special contract granted by the favored Holy Spirit. That meant that puppet was on par with Giselle Lawrence. John appears to strike down from above with his sword, but that couldn't harm someone with the mark of God. Or so they thought. John screams because his expression had changed. The Leo Saint laughs worriedly. Someone thinks it was a mistake to bring John and try to expel the Leo Saint. She feels that if it weren't for Kevin, their plan would have been a success. And if he was okay, if his deal had been good. Director Oliver, or rather they shouldn't call him that. They should call him the Lord of the Leo constellation. In the Colosseum, John was angry because no one was doing their job well, except Nona Hazard. He couldn't understand how she could defeat another saint. If he was a spirit, Hugo believes he can't defeat a saint without his power, since the powers of saints could only be nullified by other saint powers. John didn't care. He only knew that he had won the battle, but the other subordinates thought the battle had been unfair. They should invalidate it. Their captain wasn't present, so they couldn't give the verdict. And the only person from Leo's divine cadre still standing was Nona. She should give the verdict in the clear. The verdict from Nona was that John had been the winner. Some cried, and others rejoiced for betting on John. Hassan tells Hugo that it didn't make sense. It was strange that he destroyed his spirit with his power. Maybe he was the Holy Spirit of the new constellation. Then he was taking over all the relics of the place and forcing the fighters to sign contracts to join his divine cadre. Kevin thinks that if he was the future saint of humanity, the future looked bleak. Hugo thinks the same, but he kept saying that John was a god. Did he have any proof, or was it just a rumor? He was only talking nonsense. John thinks that Libra knew he had been stabbed in the heart. She knew exactly where it had happened. It was as if she had seen the scene. Libra had to have seen what happened. He wonders if a saint could have intervened, and he receives a mission to baptize his disciple. He tells Hugo to pack his things. They will go see his wife and son from the Scorpion star cluster. Canada sees that John won. That was obvious. Saint Scorpion Haley coquettishly approaches the mirror, and someone interrupts him. There was a problem at the Scorpion Hospital. Libra's children had arrived to attack the sleepers, but Sagittarius' sun had stopped them. And as a result of the observations, a 13th-star cluster had appeared with Ligen as a saint, and coincidentally, Sunjay was the first member of the group. The appearance of a new constellation shouldn't be good news for the others. Everyone would try to keep John's group under control. At the hospital, there were a lot of people seeking the reward for eliminating the first saint. They will keep targeting Sunjay. They will have to send their forces. Scorpio Hospital, Korea. The three brothers were fighting with others, since they couldn't get to their prey. Sunjay remembers that the other creatures didn't respect him. They couldn't be ruled by someone so weak. He had to get out of there, and this person asks if it was Sunjay. He thinks about running away. His coin falls, and his father appears. He asks about John, but he had gone somewhere else. The person asks if Mr. Sagittarius was also present. Sunjay accuses him to his father. He had been a killer since he became a saint. Everyone was chasing him. She says she did nothing wrong, but she was lying. She was trying to attack her son from behind, and the god of Sagittarius appears to defend Sunjay. But she pulls out a book and writes a phrase, which turns off the night light and makes the god disappear. She was Eugen, Scorpio's secretary, and she uses a verse from her Bible to make Hugo kneel before her. Hugo remembers that phrase was one of those that his god Sagittarius sometimes recited but the Bible couldn't be recited unless it was a god. He had to get out of there, and this person asks if it was Sanjay. He thinks about running away. His coin falls, and his father appears. He asks about John, but he had gone somewhere else. The person asks if Mr. Sagittarius was also present. Sanjay accuses him in front of his father. He had been a killer ever since he became a saint. Everyone was after him. She says she did nothing wrong, but she was lying. She was trying to attack her son from behind, and the god of Sagittarius appears to defend Sanjay. But she pulls out a book and writes a phrase which extinguishes the night light and makes the god disappear. She was Eugen, Scorpio's secretary, and she uses a verse from her Bible to make Hugo kneel before her. Hugo remembers that phrase was one of those his god Sagittarius sometimes recited, but the Bible could not be recited unless it was a god. But it was a little different from the original text. It was like an edited Bible. We are told that the Bible was a record of progress and the achievements of each constellation. The biblical record itself becomes legend and myth. Special beings could read and write those Bibles. That's why those beings no longer existed. In the distant past, the holy spirits, along with the vassal gods, eliminated all those who possessed scribe abilities. They couldn't turn a blind eye to a power at the level of the saints. That's why the Holy Spirit of Sagittarius wanted to interfere. The secretary laughs. His expression had changed. Now, he should get rid of the hospital flies, and John appears, flying through the air, kicking them. He just wanted to see the hospital, the people who had awakened and were already in trouble. Again, he tells Hugo he should hurry. Someone was waiting for him. Meanwhile, in the scribe's dream, during the catastrophe of his village, he was hiding in the rubble, begging to be saved. He wakes up in a bed. He had been saved. It was Haley. Back in reality, he was waking up in the embrace of Hugo and his wife. Hugo finally came to light. Gian thinks he has a very interesting ability. If he remembers correctly, he must be a scribe. He uses his shadow ability to tear himself away. He will capture the wife to keep her as a hostage, but Gian manages to save her. She was very happy because she was also a fan of Gian. Hugo asked him to let her go. The disciple of Scorpio was supposed to catch her. He will use his Bible ability, but there wasn't any page to be used at that moment. For a new throne, a giant hand grabs him. John realizes he had tried to open his Bible, and it will be Franco. He will be his scribe in his sanctuary. He tells him to go to hell, and John agrees. There was nothing he could do. So he's going to kill him, but a red spell stops him. It was Scorpio's venom gland. That meant the Saint of Scorpio was present. Haley scolds her disciple for being very reckless. She hadn't given him those orders. She scolds her disciple for being very reckless. She hadn't given him those orders. John on her back expresses that a lot of time had passed. If she didn't want to scream, she just had to answer his questions, and the Saint gives her a panic attack. They ask if she's okay. She clarifies that yes, she just wanted to walk upside down. At that moment, she curses. She couldn't be there. John should have been at Leo's sanctuary. She had to calm down. She looks at him and sees him in a very splendid way. John catches her. He had to explain everything. She enters a state of foolish infatuation. No, not that word. It took me like 5 tries to record her, man. John thinks he seriously hated her. So much that he even got sick when he talked to her, seeing he had no other choice. He asks Yoon-jae if he's going to be baptized, and he enters a completely different universe. He sees Gian and an extremely splendid snake that pierces him with its power and awakens him. He had been baptized correctly, with a unique ability, the Saint of Scorpio. He asks if he was his first baptized. Now that he did that, he could say he was a saint. He congratulates him. Seeing that he awakened, he attacks him with his subordinates. But she doesn't defend herself, since she thought he wouldn't hurt her. But seriously, they had to explain why her source of power was from the unknown civilization. She had deceived everyone, but it was true. Her power was from the unknown civilization, but she still considered herself a person and was on their side. John asked her to prove it, and he will give her a simple 2-question interrogation. What she thought of Lee John and what kind of relationship she wanted to have in the future. She's surprised. Those questions weren't a big deal. The answers were colleague and strategic alliance. She doesn't understand why he made her write that, and John says he will know the whole truth, thanks to his magical relics. If he had that, the true intentions would be revealed, and the revealed message said, I like him. He has charisma. That's why I will betray the unknown civilization. John thinks maybe the pen didn't work. Sanjay, hearing that, runs out screaming about Nona. He should find out that Uncle John's chastity was in danger, he expresses. that he understood that his saint had turned her back on her roots and had chosen the human side. All of that was because of him, because she wanted to, and the saint interrupts him and asks him not to continue. John asks her about the civilization's weapons and the dagger that stabbed him. She explains that weapon held the power of the monarch. Monarch means the highest rank of a creature from the unknown civilization. Even he couldn't resist such a weapon, and she, when she saw them, sealed it immediately. The captain asks how it is that a civilization besides theirs had eradicated the red eye 20 years ago, but she says that unfortunately, that calamity was not the leader. There were at least 3 red eyes, and it was much stronger than the one they had seen. And well, folks, with that great intrigue that there are more powerful creatures they must face, today's video ends. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed this type of content. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like these. Don't forget I upload every 2 weeks. Videos over an hour and a half long. And that's it. Thank you very, very much.